question.
Cool. Audiobook narrator Mike Scott. When selecting your next audiobook, choose from some of the great titles narrated by audiobook narrator Mike Scott, like Bloody Autumn, the Shenandoah Valley Campaign of 1864. And if you're an author or publisher interested in having your written works produced as audiobooks, give Mike a shout at MikeScottVoice.com. Mike Scott, the voice of history.
You're listening to Addressing Gettysburg.
It is warm in here tonight, ladies and gentlemen. Very warm, but a beautiful day today here in Gettysburg. Hello, everybody watching us live on Facebook. You are the lucky ones. You are the lucky ones. We have a full house in here, and the body heat is going to make it just excruciating. You know, Veronica, you could open a window there if you want to do that, too. Well, that's what's making it so hot. Yeah, and that's why we put you by the window. We got our buddy Veronica Brestensky in here, Esquire, the Right Honorable Attorney at Law, and we got old Six Questions Lent sitting over there in the corner. How you doing there, Six Questions?
Alive?
You didn't get hurt today? Nothing?
Oh, no, but the day is young.
Yes, you're not home yet, and even then, you're not safe. Yeah. Okay. Poor Mike. All right, today, ladies and gentlemen, we are talking about June 26th, 1863. Not June 26th is coming up, but June 26th in 1863, which was quite an exciting day for the people who lived in Gettysburg. But before we get to that, don't forget to follow us on Facebook, which you watching us on Facebook are already doing.
Probably.
But get those notification bells clicked there. Also, Instagram and YouTube, same thing. YouTube, start moving over to YouTube, ladies and gentlemen. Start moving over there. We're eventually going to just be moving over to YouTube. And make sure that you have your notifications turned on in all those places. Also, if you use the Apple Podcast app, please leave a 5-star review. Reviews, liking, sharing, and subscribing are the best ways to help us grow our audience. Who else could we have gotten to talk about June 26th than the man who is with us today, who is staring me down saying, why have you not acknowledged me yet? But we're going to do it right now. Tim Smith, ladies and gentlemen.
Well, I'm glad to be here.
Hey, Tim. This June 26th was quite an exciting day, and a lot of people who are new to studying the battle or something like that might not realize that it didn't just materialize on July 1st.
Well, I think a lot of visitors, when they come to Gettysburg, don't realize that the Southern Army actually passed through the town prior to the battle.
Right.
So the Friday prior to the battle, June 26, 1863, a portion of the Southern Army marched through the town of Gettysburg on their way east to York and, of course, the Susquehanna River. So, sometimes when you tell them that, they're like, well, how come they didn't get to high ground on Little Round Top first then?
Right.
It is fascinating.
Well, why, Tim? Why didn't they?
Good question.
Because they didn't care, right? They were moving on to York.
Yeah. They had other bigger fish to fry at that moment.
Gettysburg is important to us today, but it wasn't that important back then.
Yeah. The other reason June 26 doesn't get a lot of attention is because it's the Confederate Army fighting against Pennsylvania militiamen, and there are virtually no casualties. And I say that there are very few casualties. So we don't have heavy losses of the participants involved, and so kind of gets passed over. But in the for the outcome of the campaign, it's a kind of interesting story. So today we'll talk about the battle or the skirmishes around Gettysburg on June 26th and the Confederate Army marching through this area. And we'll also do some setup and talk about the different people that were involved in action on June 26th.
Yeah, the 26th is an interesting day. When I had to write the second narrative episode, I spent a lot of time on that, and I really liked learning about it because there's a lot of stuff that went on.
Yeah.
A lot of interesting things.
It's a busy day.
Yeah. So why don't we start the day? What happens in the morning? Where are we in the morning?
Okay. Well, we have a little presentation
we do have
here.
A presentation.
And do you want to start?
Go ahead.
Of course, on the screen we have Richard Ewell, and he is in charge of the advance of the Southern Army into Pennsylvania in June of 1863. And we go to the next one. On June 15th, advanced elements of the Southern Army, a cavalry command under Albert Jenkins, captured Chambersburg about midnight on June 15th. Think about this. It's not until June 30th that Buford's cavalry arrives in Gettysburg. Mm-hmm. So for a full 2 weeks, the Southern Army is in Pennsylvania, marching back and forth across the countryside, gathering supplies and provisions, and skirmishing with the Pennsylvania militia that are raised for the occasion of the invasion. So it's fascinating in that respect. Let's go to the next one. When Governor Curtin realizes that this is a serious invasion, he calls for emergency troops to come to Harrisburg and to organize into regiments that then will help repel the invaders. Mm-hmm. He's met with a lukewarm reception at first. And there are many reasons for that. I think it's easy for historians of the battle who were used to writing about units, battle-hardened veterans of the Army of the Potomac, to be critical of these Pennsylvania citizens for not rising up in force. But a lot of them believed that this was just a ploy by the federal government to get them to join the Army. And once they were in the Army, it wouldn't be so easy to get out of the Army. And the other thing was that Governor Curtin would like troops to come to Harrisburg to defend Harrisburg. So we take all the people here that could possibly be defending the homes and firesides of their loved ones, and we send them all to Harrisburg. This area might get captured, and there might be a lot of confiscation of your local farm goods, but Harrisburg will be protected.
Right. You can't make an omelet without breaking some eggs, Tim.
Yes. So it is tough to raise the militiamen at first. And then also the federal government didn't want Pennsylvania to raise a militia because they wanted men to join the Army and be sent into areas where they thought that they should be sent.
Right.
Since the outbreak of the war, there was a fundamental conflict between the state of Pennsylvania wanting to have troops guarding the border of Pennsylvania and the federal government wanting Pennsylvania troops to join the Army, put down the rebellion, and then once the rebellion was ended, there would be no threat of invasion in Pennsylvania.
That makes sense.
And this all culminates in the Gettysburg campaign when they have trouble raising troops right away. So if we go to the next slide, this is Captain Frederick Kleinfelter. And he is actually a graduate of Gettysburg College and a student at the Lutheran Theological Seminary in Gettysburg. And he is part of a group of young men who gather together at the call of Governor Curtin. And I think on the 16th, June 16th, they gather together. And they organize men that then are sent to Harrisburg. And there are about 60 guys in the unit from Gettysburg College, kids, young men, we like to call them. Mm-hmm. And there's 4 students of the Lutheran Seminary. There's a few local Gettysburg residents, and then a few more men will be put into the unit when you get to Harrisburg. But they go to Harrisburg, and they enlist in the Emergency Regiment. They end up being Company A of the 26th Pennsylvania Emergency Regiment, also known as the College Guards, because a large amount of them are from Gettysburg College.
Right.
This photograph I purchased myself at a local Gettysburg relic store. I would say maybe in the 1990s I got it, maybe in 1980s. And it was an 1862 Gettysburg College album. And, of course, I knew that he was going to be in that album. So Frederick Kleinfelter. And so he would be elected as the captain of the Gettysburg Company.
Okay, Company A.
Yeah. And so they're organized in Harrisburg. They're armed they're equipped, given uniforms, and then they'll be the first of the regiments to be sent out to confront the Confederates.
When they're back here, before they actually go up to Harrisburg, where do they organize? Where do they?
Well, there's two accounts of their organization, and both of them say it occurred on Chambersburg Street.
Okay.
One of the articles has the inception at Alexander Beeler's bookstore.
Okay, which
is on the
where?
first block of Chambersburg Street, just a little west of the square on the north side.
What is it today? Is it a house or a business?
Yeah, it's been torn down. It's next to Mama Ventura's.
Okay.
And then just down the street, there's Huber's drugstore. And another account says it occurred at that store where they gathered together. So somewhere in the first block of Chambersburg Street, they probably read the telegraph notice that's been placed on a board in front of the Star and Banner office, which is also on the first block of Chambersburg Street, to get their information. So they organize, and then they go to Harrisburg, and they're put into this company. Let's go to the next slide. Whoop. Okay, there, I got it. It's the colonel of the unit, as organized, is Colonel William Wesley Jennings. Now, he was formerly the colonel of the 127th Pennsylvania Infantry, and he was a combat veteran. He was at the Battle of Fredericksburg and at the Battle of Chancellorsville. And for those of you not familiar with it, the 127th Pennsylvania was one of the units that was just discharged in May of 1863 from the Army of the Potomac. And he's a native of Harrisburg. And so he's in Harrisburg, and Governor Curtin asked him if he would take control of this Pennsylvania Emergency Regiment.
How many emergency regiments did they raise?
There's quite a number that are raised.
Okay.
And
from this area, we just have the 26th?
Yeah, we just have Company A.
Or just Company A.
I know we're just we'll talk about. But the companies arrive in Harrisburg, and then are organized.
Okay.
And at first, like I said, they have trouble organizing the men into units, and some men travel to Harrisburg and then actually leave Harrisburg because they're not happy with the uncertainty of the time of service.
Okay.
You know, and again, a lot of them think they're being tricked into joining the Army, and then they're going to be in for 2 or 3 years, and they don't want that.
Was that happening a lot? Where did they get this idea?
I think they get the idea because they're being mustered into federal service,
okay.
and you know, they hear stories.
Okay.
I don't know if it's necessarily true, but there are units that there are times where people believe they are signing up for one thing, and then when the paper is put in front of them that they sign their enlistment papers, it says for 2 years or 3 years. A good example of this that everybody knows about is the 2nd Maine Infantry. Remember, most of the 2nd Maine was discharged from service prior to the Battle of Gettysburg. At the same time, the 127th, about the same time they're discharged. But some of the men had accidentally signed up for 3 years instead of 2 years, and they end up being...
How'd you accidentally do that, though?
Well, maybe they didn't accidentally do it, but they
were
felt
tricked
like
into
they were
doing it?
Yeah, they felt like their unit was discharged and they should be going home with the unit.
Right.
And
okay.
then that's that whole scene in the Killer Angels about that. And I think an incident actually occurs in May, and in the movie they have
the movie is a lot closer to the battle.
Day before the battle.
I think it was like 6 weeks they were with the 20th Maine.
Okay, so it was a good amount of time. But this colonel has battle experience.
So he's the only one?
No.
Okay.
Let's go to the next slide. I just wanted to mention that although there's a lot of young men in the 26th Pennsylvania Emergency Regiment and a lot of older men, you know, these are men who are not in the Army or, are coming, some of them served in other units. But by and large, the rank and file are inexperienced, but the officers have much experience. Lieutenant Colonel from Hanover, Pennsylvania, Joseph Jenkins. I believe he actually is killed commanding a unit in 1864, and the Hanover GAR, I believe, is named after him. And Major Lorenzo Greenewalt, I think he was also in the 127th. But Jenkins was in a unit, I believe he attacked a sunken lane in Antietam in the 130th, off the top of my head.
Okay.
And then, of course, I put here a list of the officers of the companies. Company A, of course, from Gettysburg, Adams County. And you can see Company B from Bradford County, Company C from Clinton County, Company D from Dauphin County, Company E from Lebanon County. I like to point out that in Company A, the second lieutenant is Luther Slater of Loudoun County, Virginia. He was actually in a Northern Virginia unit, and it was called the Loudoun County Rangers.
Oh, yeah.
And during the Second Manassas Campaign, a Confederate cavalry detachment from Loudoun County made a move around the Union lines and attacked the Loudoun Rangers at a place called Waterford. And Luther Slater was at this battle, and he was severely wounded. And it was basically guys from the same town, some from the Northern Army and some from the Southern Army, fighting against each other. And there's a plaque at this church where they surround the Loudoun County Rangers, the Confederates.
The Loudoun County Rangers are cavalry?
And they're a Northern cavalry unit.
And he was severely
from Northern
wounded?
Virginia.
He was severely wounded.
So his parents...
Interesting, Tim, because I thought cavalry didn't really get hurt.
Oh, very good. So he said...
Cool.
Very good.
Go ahead.
His parents send him to Gettysburg
Okay.
to recover. And so here he is. He's recovering. And I should tell
And then
you...
this battle's coming his way.
Yeah. And I should tell you, at the Battle of Waterford in I think it's in August of 1862, the unit that attacked the Loudoun County Rangers was Elijah White's 35th Virginia Battalion of Cavalry.
Okay. All right.
And some of the men in that unit had brothers and relatives in the Northern unit. So here he joins this unit. He goes to Harrisburg. He becomes an officer because he has military experience. They're sent back to Gettysburg. And on June 26, he's sent out to Marsh Creek. And guess who comes down the road and captures him?
White.
The same guys. Elijah White's 35th Battalion of Cavalry.
The Comanches.
Now, he also, I should mention, Luther Slater, falls in love with a girl named Yount.
Who hasn't?
Yount, yeah. Her father owns the hotel, the Washington Hotel, just where the Lincoln Diner is.
Oh, okay.
And he ends up marrying her. Oh. But he survives. Okay, so if we go down the list, let's go to the next page. You can see Company F from Montgomery County. Lycoming County. I think, if I'm not mistaken, in Montgomery County unit is Pennypacker, Samuel Pennypacker, who later becomes the governor of Pennsylvania. And then Company I is from Hanover.
Okay.
And the captain's John Summerfield Forrest. And the first lieutenant is John Quincy Adams Peffer from New Oxford.
You almost had me, and then you said Peffer, and you lost me.
John Quincy Adams Peffer. And so about a dozen men in Company I are actually from New Oxford, Pennsylvania.
Okay.
So we have another, it's kind of a local unit. Now, you might look at the bottom of this. I created this list, and my source for it is there's a roster of the company officers of the 26th at the State Archives. And so I actually went through some of the rosters of these units at the State Archives. I'm not going to get into too much more detail about that now.
Okay.
But here's a picture. Let's go to the next one. Here's a picture of Henry Wirt Shriver of Company I, 26th Pennsylvania Emergency Regiment. Now, he's related to the Wirts of Hanover, but he's Henry Wirt Shriver. And, of course, he lives in Union Mills, Maryland.
Okay.
Where Jeb Stuart spends the night on, June 29th, and the Union Army 5th Corps spends the night there on June 30th. So the reason I put this in here, because this is a photograph of Henry Wirt Shriver in uniform. We do not know that he served in another Civil War unit. This is the only known image of a soldier wearing the uniform of the 26th Pennsylvania Emergency Regiment.
Okay.
The other guys we have photographs of in this unit,
but not in uniform.
Served in other, no, they're in uniform,
okay.
but they were in other units.
Oh, gotcha. All right.
And so their uniform is probably from their other unit. But here's a guy in the uniform of the 26th Pennsylvania Emergency Regiment.
Oh, that's interesting.
Altogether, I guess there were about 740 of these men in the 26th.
That's a pretty decent sized
It's a pretty good regiment,
yeah.
yes.
But what was their metal? What was the quality?
Well, that's going to be another issue. So now let's go to the next slide. Another character that's involved in June 26th is Captain Robert Bell of the Adams County Cavalry.
Big Bad Bell.
He later became major of the 21st Pennsylvania Cavalry. Robert Bell had been in a local cavalry militia unit since the beginning of the war. They organized in 1861 under the term the Adams Dragoons, and they were commanded by a captain out of Fairfield, a guy named Hill McCreary. In 1862, during the Antietam campaign, they formed again. And at the outbreak of the Gettysburg campaign, Captain Robert Bell decided to go around. He talked to some of the guys who had been in the 1862 sort of militia unit. And he got on a train and he rode to Harrisburg and met with Governor Curtin and said, I have a unit of cavalrymen to supply our own horses, and we're ready to enlist. And Governor Curtin thought about it for a little while, and he said, you know what? Stay in Gettysburg, and I'll send an officer to you. I want you to act as scouts in that area at the advance of the Southerners and feed information to me about their activities.
Okay.
There's a telegraph in Gettysburg, and the telegraph line runs along the railroad line to Hanover and Hanover Junction and up to York and, over to York and to Harrisburg. So they can get telegraphic messages of the day-to-day situation from Gettysburg, and they can have this group of scouts out there. So they didn't have uniforms during the Gettysburg campaign, and they were only known as the Adams County Cavalry. Now, after the campaign's over, then they end up being in Columbia, Pennsylvania, and at the end of July, the men are enlisted into the 21st Pennsylvania Cavalry. And so a lot of people say the 21st Pennsylvania Cavalry is here, and they have a monument on the battlefield, and there's a monument to one of their members was killed on June 26th.
Right.
But these guys don't belong to the 21st Pennsylvania Cavalry, don't even know about it.
Right.
That's a future unit that they are not in at the time. And there's
there's two monuments to the 21st PA, isn't there? Mm-hmm. And one is what? Why are there two? And they're close together.
One of them is a regimental monument that honors the fact that one of their companies was involved in the June 26th
and is that
action.
referring to Bell's?
Yes.
Okay, so even though it was one of their companies, but later it was one of their companies.
Yeah, it's very confusing.
Yes.
I don't think they should have a monument on the battlefield.
Right, because they weren't here.
They were not here.
A future element of that regiment was here, which, that doesn't make any sense.
But then they also have a monument to George Sandow, who was killed on June 26th, and who was never a member of the 21st Pennsylvania Cavalry.
Do tell.
Because he was killed before they were
Oh, yes, of course. That makes sense. I thought it was more of a...
You thought it was going to be something
I thought there was something, sorry. Sorry, it's the heat getting me down. Yeah. By the way, Mike, would you take this rag and dab my forehead every once in a while, please? Thank you. Okay, go ahead.
So he's going to play a role in this action. Then we have, let's go to the next slide. It should be Major Granville O. Howler. And I think I could write a book about this guy. Let's see. And, I should tell you, to preface this, I'm showing some photographs here. And do we have the Granville O. Howler slide up? I'm showing some photographs here from my private collection. This photograph is actually from the Adams County Historical Society. It is the only known Civil War image of him. I made a mistake a few years ago, probably about 20 years ago. Carlisle, United States Army Military History Institute, had this just phenomenal guy that worked in their photographic research library. And he knew all the Civil War dealers and collectors, and he was making a collection at Carlisle of known images of Civil War soldiers. And so I took him all the Adams County Historical Society photographs up there and allowed them to be copied. And while he worked up there, people would look at the photographs and credit them to the Adams County Historical Society. I thought it was kind of cool. And he would actually even have them call us and ask permission to use them. Well, the Army, he retired, and the Army changed their policy and just made them public to everybody. And so now people use this photograph, and it's been used again and again and again, and it's not credited properly to us.
Oh, man.
But we have the original image in our archives. So let me tell you about this guy, Major Granville Owen Howler. He's born in York, Pennsylvania in 1819. He attended York Public Schools and went to the York County Academy. In 1839, he applied to the United States Military Academy at West Point. But instead, he was invited to Washington, D.C. He was interviewed and immediately commissioned into the United States Army as a second lieutenant in the 4th United States Infantry. He served at Fort Gibson, was involved in some fighting against the Cherokee. In 1841, his unit was sent to Florida, where he's involved in several skirmishes during the Seminole War. He was subsequently stationed at Jefferson Barracks, kind of like Lewis Armistead, and then Louisiana and along the Texas border with Mexico. In 1846, he served under Zachary Taylor at the opening of the Mexican War and was in the Army of Occupation. In 1847, he commanded a company in the 4th United States Infantry and was on the march with Winfield Scott from Veracruz to Mexico City.
Cool.
So he's a pretty serious
So he's been in a lot of stuff, yeah.
battle-hardened veteran. According to an 1863 biography of him, Major Howler is a high-toned gentleman of the old school of Army officer. He served as lieutenant at the battles of Palo Alto, Monterey, Veracruz, Cerro Gordo, Churubusco. I never say that right. El Monterey de Rey, El Molina de Rey. He was in the storming party at Mexico City, and in each of his engagements, he is honorably mentioned by name for his bravery, skill, and military character. He was a companion in arms and a messmate with General Ulysses S. Grant.
Oh.
Now, this is written in 1863.
Huh.
So, a little before Grant becomes
Right,
famous.
right.
Yeah, and one of his major accidents, he received a promotion because of his action at Chapultepec.
Okay.
So he led the charge at Mexico City. In 1861, he was in the New Mexico Territory. He was at Fort Mojave in the New Mexico Territory. He arrived in Washington, D.C., was assigned to the Army of the Potomac. He was the Inspector General of the Provost Marshal General's Department. He actually was assigned to the Army of the Potomac and was in charge of the headquarters staff of McClellan's army. So he is very good friends with George Brenton McClellan. And he is an ardent supporter of McClellan, and he was devastated when McClellan was relieved of command. As a matter of fact, after Burnsides took over and we had the debacle at Fredericksburg, he got a little bit too drunk late one night, and he was bad-mouthing Abraham Lincoln and the authorities in Washington for their dereliction of duty at releasing the great McClellan from command. There's a neat quote I found about one article. I wonder if I put it in here. Let's see. A January 1863 article remarked that he was proverbial in the Army as an authority upon all disputed points of tactics. So, he likes to talk military tactics.
Yeah.
So anyway, this getting drunk and bad-mouthing Abraham Lincoln in front of other people actually got him into trouble. They reported him, and the justice was slow in catching up with him. But in the summer of 1863, he would be relieved of command.
In the summer or December?
In the summer.
In the summer.
In the summer. So after the Battle of Gettysburg. It didn't catch up to him until after the battle. And I should mention that some writers have insinuated that he was released from command of the Army because of his performance on June 26th.
Oh.
And it had absolutely nothing to do with that.
What is his job on June 26th?
So he is leaves the Army after Chancellorsville. He's sick, and he's in Harrisburg, or he's in York at the time of the Gettysburg campaign. So Darius Couch is named the commander of a newly formed department of the Susquehanna on June 11th. He makes his way to Harrisburg, and he offers his services to Darius Couch, who he knew from the Army of the Potomac, or Darius Couch.
No, Darius Couch.
And
of Couch's brigade.
yeah. So Couch makes him an aide-de-camp and says, I have a job for you. So he sends him to Gettysburg. Now, he first rides to the Wrightsville Bridge. He organizes the defenses there, surveys the situation, rides to York, his hometown, gives a big speech, and he talks about how he's going to organize the troops there. And then he comes to Gettysburg, and he tries to organize the people of the town to action. And he's the one who musters Adams County Cavalry, Robert Bell's Adams County Cavalry, into federal service.
Okay, so he's kind of coming down as like Couch's representative.
Yes,
and
he's going to be in charge of the military situation in Gettysburg on June 26th.
Okay.
That's why he's so important.
All right.
Now, he also calls a meeting at the Adams County Courthouse on June 20th, and according to J. Howard Word, they ring the courthouse bell and people come, and then he makes a big speech, and he wants all males to enlist in some sort of unit, whether it be the Adams County Cavalry or just gathering guns together and or having older men gather axes and are going to fell some trees in the passes or act as bushwhackers. He's just trying to arm everyone, and he gives a big speech about it. Now, the next slide is that I think it's David McConaughey. Is the guy with the crack on the photograph? Okay. David McConaughey, a Gettysburg attorney, as Veronica might know. And he actually organizes a group of men that will be involved in the action around June 1863. I should point out that June 26th, his wife gives birth to a child. And he's out gallivanting around the countryside, gathering information for the Union cause.
Wow. David.
Yeah. So he's the leader.
How old is he?
Of Scouts. Well, good question. I don't think I have his date of birth here.
I mean, is this
He's a little older.
But
he's probably 50.
He's 50. And his wife had a baby.
Well, maybe he's 40.
Good for him.
Can't remember off the top of my head.
Still, good for him.
But David McConaughey is fascinating in the respects that he gets a bunch of older men from town to disguise themselves as older men. And then they ride on horses or sneak out across the countryside and they gather information about the Southern Army.
Okay.
And then he brings that information back, goes to the telegraph office, and he telegraphs Governor Curtin dispatches from his scouts.
Okay.
And he has some very good reports about the whereabouts of the Southern Army and the situation when, that information was desperately sought in Harrisburg.
Got it.
And, there is a group of records at the state archives, incoming telegraphs to the governor's office. Mm-hmm. And when I found that, I was in heaven.
Like a kid in a candy store.
Telegraphs, every telegraph that came into the office, they recorded and then they put it in this file. And you could look through all the dispatches, and I found a lot of David McConaughey dispatches on the activities of the Confederate Army leading up to June 26th.
Did you find anything interesting that maybe never made it into the history books?
Absolutely.
What'd you find?
Well, I think the thing that people have credited from my discovering it more than any other thing was David Wills sent a telegraph from Gettysburg to Governor Curtin saying that, hey, we have a group of colored residents that have formed their own company and would like to be a militia unit here during the call for emergency troops. And then Governor Curtin telegraphs back, no, we're not having black soldiers in the emergency regiments, I'm sorry, and turns them down.
What was the guy's name that was the leader of that
Owen
group?
Robinson. No, I'm sorry. Upton. It's Randolph Johnson. Randolph Johnson. So I think people, I brought that to people's attention, and that's gotten a lot of publicity from this. But there's lots of other great stuff I haven't really shared that comes out of the June 26 telegraphs or the June telegraphs. So and it just makes gives you more detail of the picture that you can't get. Mm-hmm. I should just mention one more thing about David McConaughey. On June 28th, 2 days after Juba Early passes through the town, Joseph Copeland and his Michigan Cavalry Brigade enters Gettysburg, and they are trying to gather information about the Confederate Army. And David McConaughey says, yes, they passed through 2 days ago. He tells them how many men they had passing through based upon how many flags, regimental flags he saw them carry, how many pieces of artillery. And also, he has information about the other Confederate column that passed north of the town. And then Copeland rides back to Emmitsburg, sends this message to General Meade. Of course, when Copeland gets beyond Emmitsburg, he finds out that he's been relieved of duty, and eventually George Armstrong Custer will be made the general in charge of the Michigan Cavalry Brigade.
The hero of Gettysburg.
Yeah. But I think it's on June 29th that General Meade sends a personal note to David McConaughey thanking him for his service as a scout and giving information to the Army. So he's credited with that, that distinction.
Right.
Okay, let's go to the next one. Another person, and you're probably surprised by all these people you've never heard of that are involved in the June 26 action. This is Samuel Randall, Captain Samuel Randall, a United States congressman. Yes. And he is in charge of a group of men known as the 1st Troop of Philadelphia City Cavalry. So Samuel Randall, I should say that the 1st City Troop are a group of men from Philadelphia that are volunteers. They're not mustered in the federal service. The inception of the unit is from the American Revolution. And they formed, they say part of George Washington's bodyguard. And the 1st Troop of Philadelphia City Cavalry still exists. Of course, they have tanks now. But they have a museum. They have an archives. There's lots of information. Samuel Randall leaves Washington, D.C. The 1st City Troop go to Harrisburg, and he meets them in Harrisburg. And they come by train from Philadelphia. They bring their horses with them on the train. When they get to Harrisburg, Governor Curtin says, great, we're going to muster in the federal service. And they say, no, we're volunteers. We're not here to be mustered in the federal service. They get criticized a little bit, especially at the Battle of Wrightsville, because they ride away very quickly in the face of danger. And some people suggest, well, they probably didn't want to be mustered in the federal service. That way nobody could really tell them what to do.
Right.
Now, what's interesting is there's one guy in this unit. I always like to study a unit's pension records at the National Archives. Mm-hmm. But if they're not mustered in the federal service, they're not really going to be able to collect a pension.
Right.
But there is a pension. There's pension files for every unit. And so I looked to see if there was any pension files for this unit, and there was. 2 men tried to collect a pension. One guy, and I think it was on June 20th, he ran into some Confederate scouts. They were riding away from the Confederate scouts, and he was on a horse that was a little bit too rambunctious, and the horse ran into a tree, and the guy broke his leg, and he had to be sent back to Philadelphia. And his leg didn't really ever set well. And after the war, he tried to collect a pension from the federal government for his military service. And they were like, I'm sorry, there's no record of you being mustered into federal service.
Oh, man.
So he couldn't collect his pension. But anyway, Samuel Randall has about 40 men. They leave Harrisburg, and Governor Curtin sends them to Gettysburg to be under the command of Granville O'Halloran. Oh, and let's go to the next one. there's some great information about this unit in the Gettysburg newspapers. We have 3 or 4 Gettysburg citizens that kind of poke fun at them because they have an incredibly fancy dress uniform. And you can see here in this illustration, do you have the illustration up there? Of the armory of the 1st Troop of Philadelphia City Cavalry. This is an 1863 engraving from the Free Library of Philadelphia. And yes, I traveled to the library to get this illustration. I was so happy when I asked if they had anything on this unit, and they broke out this illustration.
Huh.
But can you see the men on horseback with the, what would you call that hat?
What do they call that?
The plumed?
A cuirassier.
Coursier?
Yeah, well, you can try to say that word.
Okay, I'm not going to.
I'm not going to.
My pronunciation skills are not that great.
You could, Eric. You could zoom in on that so that people could actually make it out on their phones.
Let's see if I can.
Yeah,
that's funny.
Just make it bigger.
Yeah,
So now in Gettysburg, we had Granville O'Howler in charge,
right? And
then we have, of course, the 21st Pennsylvania Cavalry, Company B, which is Robert Bell. We talked about them, Robert Bell. And then the Adams County Cavalry. And then we got these scouts, these independent scouts. And then we got everyone that Granville O'Howler has talked into getting a shotgun and a shovel and a pickaxe.
Yeah.
And
how successful was he at that?
We do have information that companies are organized at several locations around Adams County. There's one formed in Bendersville and Middletown and Littlestown and Mountjoy Township and New
So he's not
Oxford.
just appealing to Gettysburg citizens.
Yeah.
He's going all over the place.
And so they're forming these little militia units. What are these militia units going to do? That's another question.
Right.
But they're forming. As a matter of fact, in Bendersville, not too far north of here, they organize a unit, and they have a man who has some military experience who commands the unit, is drilling them. And one of the men, his gun accidentally discharges and kills another one of the guys in the unit.
During drill?
Yeah, during drill.
Oh.
So let's go to the next slide, Eric. So here's a diagram of basically what Granville O'Howler's plan is. And this is really Darius Couch's plan. On June 15th, Albert Jenkins had captured Chambersburg. Now, they believe, they being the federal authorities or the Pennsylvania officials, that they are doing a good job of containing the invasion. The plan is to bring troops from Gettysburg, move them out west, block the South Mountain Range. Then they're going to bring troops in from the west, block the North Mountain Range along Tuscarora Summit. And then militia units that are now arriving in Harrisburg from New York and New Jersey will actually be marched down Route 11 through Shippensburg, and they will confront Albert Jenkins' force.
No, so go back to Tuscarora Summit. Who went out that far?
Well, some Union troops, militiamen.
Came in.
Yes, they're coming in from the west.
Because there's a bar up on top of that summit now. Yeah, and a cool lookout over the valley.
That bar's been there a long time.
Yeah, I bet.
Yes.
Well, I mean, since the battle.
That's exactly what we're talking about.
Yeah, that area. They went to the bar.
Yes.
Naturally.
So what's interesting is the Pennsylvania officials believe that they are being successful in their containment of the Confederate forces. We know that Albert Jenkins is just sent to Chambersburg, and that on June 22nd, Rhodes' division is going to cross, over the Potomac and march into Pennsylvania and then into Chambersburg.
Right.
And then the Confederate Army will build their forces there until they break out and march across the state of Pennsylvania. But Granville O'Howler at Gettysburg, which is on the very right of this map, believes now only if he had a regiment of infantry, he could send that regiment into the mountain range. They could block the passes, and the Confederates would have no chance of breaking through that defensive position. And one of your Patreon members asked a question. Do the state the officials in Pennsylvania really think
Yeah.
that these militiamen are going to hold back this force? Who was that?
Skip Wankman.
I've studied it for a long time. I think Granville O'Hara does believe that he can hold the Confederate Army back. Which
Really?
is,
With a regiment
which
of
is
green.
very misguided.
Wow.
Very, very misguided.
Is that simply by the power of his military prowess that
But he
he's going
goes
to do
around
it?
and he makes these speeches, and he even after he leaves Gettysburg, he goes to Hanover and makes a speech, and he goes back to York and makes a speech. He wants the invalids at the York Hospital to arm themselves and go out to stop Juba Early's offensive on York.
What?
And they basically ride away. It just doesn't make any sense.
What, Mike?
Well, that'd be me. I'd just be wandering out there with the info.
Mike would go out there with his twisted ankle. They'll use you as a human shield. They'll just put you in front of the trees they fell on the street.
But I do think that I do believe they think they're serious. So let's go to the next slide now. Whoop.
Yeah, that's crazy to me, though. I mean, you would think he would know better than to think that
he would know better, being part of the Army of the Potomac, which was not allowed to move until they were prepared.
Right. Right.
And had trained for months and months and months and months.
Yeah, and had a combat experience.
Yeah.
Oh.
So here, let's go to the next map is June 21st, and there's a skirmish at Monterey. Basically, on June 21st, Granville O'Hara gets the Philadelphia City Troop that have arrived now, and the Adams County Cavalry, and all the men with picks and shovels and axes, and says, okay, let's go out to the pass at Monterey, and we'll drop some trees across the road.
Mm-hmm.
So they go out there. They start building a barricade across the road near the Monterey House. It's interesting, I have a civilian account by a guy named Samuel Griffin, who was with the Pennsylvania Reserves, had kind of went AWOL, and returned to Gettysburg. He's actually from Fairfield, was living in Gettysburg with his sister during this time period, and he actually went out to Waynesboro as a scout, gathered information on his own, and came back and delivered that information. He met Granville O'Hara at the Monterey House on the summit of South Mountain. And what's really interesting, Samuel Griffin and Granville O'Hara are both veterans of the Battle of Monterey, and are in a hotel that's named after that battle.
Yeah,
which I think is
cool.
fascinating.
Yeah,
I get a kick out of stuff like that. So they're there, and all of a sudden, part of Albert Jenkins' brigade comes riding up the mountain, and there's a skirmish there. That's why I have the yellow star. And later that evening, another detachment of Albert Jenkins' command rides over the mountain by way of Cold Springs Road, rides onto Tract Road, rides down through the town of Fairfield, and then rides up behind the barricade and rides right through where the men are building the barricade. People jump to the sides of the road. People are firing their guns wildly. 60 or so cavalrymen ride through the barricade, firing at everyone. No one is wounded in the skirmish. And I would say that this may be my problem with getting people interested in some of these things that happened before the battle. No one is killed.
except for Sando.
Well, not yet. We can't.
Well, we didn't get there. Okay.
But okay. When I say no one, very few people are killed in these skirmishes.
You're not too fond of very few people.
Very few people. Okay, let's.
No,
go.
I know what you mean though. It's not big casualties and people like that. Unfortunately, yeah.
So let's go to the
but
next slide.
But it is interesting though.
Okay. Now we have a slide. So June 22nd, again, they're dropping trees along the passes. On June 23rd, Granville O'Hara, the Philadelphia City Troop, the Adams County Cavalry, and the militia from Arntsville. See the little blue line I have coming out of Arntsville and over to the
the flanking
Route
force.
30?
Yeah.
The militia of Arntsville, which includes a veteran of the War of 1812.
Oh, wow.
John Burns?
The Arntsville John Burns.
John Burns is most likely at both of these engagements, although we don't have any documentation of the men who came out of Gettysburg to help build the barricade, I would suggest he's probably at both these engagements.
Now, why do you say that? Because you said most likely. What makes you think that?
Because when Granville Howard asked for volunteers, I'm sure his hand was up.
You think so?
Yes. Yes, I think he's here.
So then July 1st wasn't his first action against the Confederates.
If we count these things. But again,
interesting.
I don't have any particular
no one has mentioned
positive information. We do know that Joseph Broadhead's involved in one of these.
Right. Because Sarah's worried.
So where Joseph Broadhead is, the neighbor of John Burns is probably there too.
Okay. Well, that might explain then why on July 1st he's like, "Come on, Broadhead," and Broadhead's like, "Oh, the mess of beans. I have to pick a mess of beans," and and so maybe John Burns is thinking, "Well, you were with me the other day, so why aren't you coming with me now?" Well,
Could be.
The beans.
So they're building a barricade along what is now Route 30, and I would say that this barricade, from all my reading of it, is being built in front of the Italian restaurant.
Okay.
Do you know that one?
Yeah.
What's
it called? Ciao Bella or something? Ciao Bella, yeah.
That's right.
I've always wanted to try it.
Across the street from the nursing home. They're building a barricade across the road near that spot.
Oh, the old people must have been yelling at them.
And on June 23rd, the Albert Jenkins guys again come up to Caledonia Furnace, and one of Bell's Adams County Cavalry is on a horseback in the middle of the road, and they chase him. And they chase him to the barricade, and the men at the barricade flee into the woods.
Of course.
They actually capture some of them, but they let them go because they weren't dressed in uniform.
Right. Probably felt bad for him.
Yeah. And the Jenkins guys, the 14th Virginia Cavalry, chase the Adams County Cavalry back through the Cashtown Pass. And this is the incident we fondly refer to as the bushwhacking.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Where on June 23rd, let's go to the next one. I think I have a slide of it. The star is on the far left of the map, and it is near the base of a projection known as Gallagher's Knob.
Oh, it's the old Adams County
and
map.
Henry Hahn, who lives north of Cashtown, you can, along a tributary of Marsh Creek, you can see where it says Henry Hahn. I got it circled there. He is drinking at the Willow Springs Hotel, and he becomes inebriated and announces that he's going to shoot himself a rebel. So he goes out along, the base of the mountain along the road, and just happens to be hiding in the woods when the Confederates break through and chase the Adams County Cavalry down the road, and he actually kills a Confederate soldier.
Does Hahn live pretty close to where the round barn is now?
Okay, the round barn would be, I don't know if you can see that weird intersection just below him where you see the new road.
It's like a triangle.
So, yeah, the triangle. He lives where the Cashtown Lions Park is.
Okay, yeah.
So if you go up...
So that's fairly close.
Yeah, that's very close. So he lives closer to the fruit stand, the fruit and vegetable stand there.
Delicious.
On the modern Route 30. But he kills a guy named Eli Amick. Eli Amick is the first soldier killed in Adams County during the Gettysburg campaign.
First Confederate soldier. First soldier of any
killed,
side.
So, and then the Confederates retreat after their
wait. So this is when Gordon's coming through?
No.
Oh, when is this?
It's June 23rd.
Okay. So
June 23rd.
And who is it? What's the unit? Is it White's?
The 14th Virginia Cavalry of Albert Jenkins Brigade.
Okay.
Yes.
And so this kid goes out and he shoots himself a reb.
It's actually, guys, Henry Hahn's.
He's an old fella.
An older guy, yeah.
So this old codger goes out and he shoots himself a reb.
Yeah.
And they never find him?
No. Then he runs into the woods. He's with some of his friends. One of his friends that he's with is an older guy named Schultz.
Okay.
And he's like the great grandfather of my fiance.
Okay.
So
nice.
The Schultzes
The
are
Schultzes.
involved in that.
Nice.
And you can actually see them, the Schultzes, on the map too. And let me just tell you, they know about this and they are very proud of it. Okay, so let's go to the next map. So that's that all occurred on June 23rd. Now, in the meantime, the Jenkins Brigade is gathering supplies and provision. They hit Caledonia Furnace. They destroy the bridge at Scotland. They're gathering up African-American citizens and returning them back over the line into Maryland and Virginia. And they're waiting for the advance of the Southern infantry. Now, on June 24th, the 26th Pennsylvania Emergency Regiment has been given uniforms. They've been given rifles. They've been given ammunition. They've each fired their weapon once or twice. Okay. And now they're ready.
So they're well trained.
They're well trained. Yeah. They're put on a train and they're sent to Gettysburg. Okay. And then Granville O'Hara is going to use them as a blocking force in the mountain range against the advance of the Confederates.
This is his mighty regiment that he's...
That's right.
Yes.
Well, what happens? And if you know railroad history, these soldiers are put on the two trains, and the train is called a special. At this time, trains run on a regular schedule.
Yeah.
But this is an unscheduled train. So there's a lady, and she's moving her cow from one field to another over a deep cul-de-sac gully known that Swift Run passes through under the railroad tracks.
It's out Route 30.
It's on Route 30 East, probably about 6 miles from Gettysburg, Swift Run. You can still see the modern Route 30 and where Swift Run crosses, and south of it would be where the incident occurred. So she's hurrying her cow across the top of the bridge, and all of a sudden, a train comes around the corner. She runs as fast as she can. She tries to get her cow off the tracks. She dives off the track at the last moment. The cow doesn't make it.
Oh.
The train hits the cow. The train derails.
Wow, that's a fat cow.
And all the men in the boxcars on the first train are thrown sideways. Some of the men are slightly injured. The cow is chopped up and ate for dinner.
They had the cow for dinner.
But the 26th Pennsylvania Emergency Regiment, the trains are halted. The men unboard the trains into a field next to the tracks where they're trapped for the next 2 days.
Okay.
Because they're 6 miles from Gettysburg, and there's absolutely no way for them to possibly get to town. So they just camp in the field that night.
They can't walk.
And they wait until the train gets back on the track. This must have been just killing Granville O'Hara.
Yeah, absolutely.
Why can't they walk the other 6 miles?
Exactly.
So they get into camp.
Okay.
So finally, on the morning of June 26th, they get the train back on the track, and they get on the trains and they ride into Gettysburg, and they disembark in the town that morning. Now, about 100 of them on June 25th walked the long 6 miles to Gettysburg and arrived. And Howard said, well, they got there on the evening of June 25th, and the rest of your guys are coming in the morning, you might as well just wait. So they didn't get sent out to the mountain range as they anticipated on the 24th or the 25th. It'll be not until the 26th.
Okay.
Now let's go to the next one. This is Michael Jacobs.
Oh, yeah, the old professor.
He's a professor at Gettysburg College, and he wrote a book, The Rebel Invasion of Maryland and Pennsylvania in the Battle of Gettysburg. His book, it says in it that it's printed in 1864, but we know that people are reading it in December of 1863 because there's an article in the New York Times about how officers in the Army of the Potomac are reading this book.
Okay.
Granville O'Hara does not appreciate this book at all.
Oh.
Michael Jacobs suggests in his book that Granville O'Hara knows the Southern Army is coming over that mountain. And he sends the 26th Pennsylvania Emergency Regiment out there to sacrifice themselves. And, of course, Howard has no idea that Southerners are going to be coming over the mountain on June 26th. He was just hoping to get them moving and get out there so that they could block the Chambersburg Pike.
So it's not that the 26th is coming back to Gettysburg to defend Gettysburg. It's that this is where the rail line ends, and they're going to get off here, and then they're going to proceed west on foot.
This is part of the general plan that's been come up with by Darius Couch and Granville
Darius
Howard,
Couch,
and they've been talking about it. So let's go to the next map there, Eric. The morning of June 26th. So the 26th Emergency Regiment reaches Gettysburg. They eat breakfast. The people in the town feed them. The townspeople are very, very happy to see this large amount of men, including Company A, that has returned to Gettysburg with nice uniforms and muskets.
Looking handsome.
And what is just a parade, they march out to Chambersburg Pike, and they go about 4 miles. And they decide, well, it's time to go into camp. So they go into camp.
We've walked really far today,
along
guys.
Marsh Creek, about 4 miles, 4 miles west of Gettysburg. And they also stop because William Wesley Jennings has received some disturbing reports from Robert Bell of the Adams County Cavalry. And they decide, before they proceed any further, they should relay this information back to Granville O'Hara, because citizens from western Adams County are fleeing across Route 30 in huge numbers, saying that the Confederate Army is advancing from Franklin County into Adams. And so now we're on the morning of June 26th, and we'll talk about the different things that happened here. So I know it took a long time to get here.
Yeah, well, there's some buildup.
Yeah. So let's go to the next one. Do I have Juba Early at the next one?
Old Jube.
Sure do.
So there's a couple interesting things that I have learned over the years about Richard Ewell. One of them is that it seems like the plan of invasion is Ewell's plan. There's a great quote by Robert E. Lee early on. At 7 a.m. on June 19th, General Lee sent a dispatch to General Ewell, who was at that time near Hagerstown, telling him to carry out the plan that he had proposed.
Oh, so, okay.
On June 25th, Juba Early leaves his division, which had just reached the area of Greenwood in eastern Franklin County, just to the west of Adams County.
Right.
Juba Early rides to Chambersburg and meets with Richard Ewell, and they discuss the plan. And basically, it seems as first their plan is to march across to Adams and York County, destroy the Columbia-Wrightsville Bridge. And then he's going to turn and march to Harrisburg and join in with another column under Robert Rhodes that's proceeding north with Ewell to Carlisle and is going to attack Harrisburg. And A.P. Hill's corps will come up and proceed eastward and follow Juba Early. According to this, the best information we have from the official reports. It does seem, however, that when Early had expected that the federal authorities would destroy the bridge at Wrightsville.
Right.
Now, when he gets to York and they haven't destroyed the bridge yet, that's when he gets the idea he can capture the bridge. And then he has this crazy idea in his autobiography that he'll put his whole division on horses that he's going to steal from Lancaster County and he'll ride to Philadelphia. Which I'm just like, what?
Yeah. Well,
His orders are to destroy the bridge and then proceed to Harrisburg. So if he could capture the bridge, he could cross and then he could march on Harrisburg from that direction.
Sure.
So, I mean, the bridge intact would be nice. So Juba Early is the one that's going to march across Adams County on June 26th. And his force, I just thought I'd mention this, includes 4 infantry brigades. General Harry T. Hayes, the Louisiana Tigers. Brigadier General John Brown Gordon's Georgians. Colonel Isaac Avery's North Carolinians. And William F. Smith's, or Extra Billy Smith's, Virginians. He also has 16 pieces of artillery along under the command of Lieutenant Hilary Jones. And ahead of his column, he's going to have 2 cavalry units for support, temporarily attached to his brigade, or his command. The 35th Virginia Battalion of Cavalry under Lieutenant Colonel Elijah White, and the 17th Virginia Cavalry under Colonel William French. Okay?
Okay.
Well, so the first thing they do before they march off is they destroy the furnace of Thaddeus Stevens.
So he doesn't have any heat in his house.
Yeah, at Caledonia.
Not that kind of furnace.
Yeah. At the time, Stevens' total losses were estimated to be between $80,000 and $100,000. Easily the greatest single monetary loss of any person in Pennsylvania during the campaign.
I bet. What is that in today's money? Do you know? A lot.
So Stevens was never compensated for his money, and to his credit, Stephen never filed for compensation because his furnace was destroyed.
Oh, okay.
The Caledonia furnace, it became an active site in 1830 when a forge was built there by Thaddeus Stevens and James Paxton. Stevens came to Gettysburg in 1816. It was named after Caledonia, Stevens' birthplace, Caledonia County, Vermont. In 1842, Stevens bought Paxton out and added a rolling mill in 1852. At the height, the furnace lands consisted of 12,000 acres.
Wow.
In both Adams and Franklin County. One source suggested maybe at one point he owned 18,000 acres. There's a suggestion that the furnace, along with Pine Grove Furnace, is connected to the Underground Railroad because a large amount of people that work there are black. And, when you look in the census, they all say they're from Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah. So wait, this picture, though, that you're showing, or that we were showing.
This is an 1890 picture after they rebuilt the furnace.
After they rebuilt. So the building on the right in the picture, is that the building that's still there, the blacksmith shop?
No.
Okay.
The blacksmith shop's way off to the left.
Okay.
This furnace this is the building in front of the furnace where you would make the iron, put the iron ore into pig iron or make things out of the iron ore. If you look behind the building on the right, can you see there's a stone furnace there that you can kind of still see? That's the furnace smokestack.
Okay.
And then there's a pier that goes out to the top of the smokestack where you bring the charcoal. And believe me, I'm not an expert on furnaces. But this is the rebuilt furnace in 1890. It's the only image we have of it.
Okay.
But there is that furnace, they built a replica of it today. And if you go down to Caledonia, if you look on the right, there's a parking lot, and the rebuilt furnace is there. And they actually have a nice plaque on it that tells you about the Confederates burning it. It's fascinating that Juba Early ordered destruction of the furnace himself. And after the war, in his autobiography, he was very specific. And he said that, Stevens was an enemy of the South, and he ordered the furnace to be burned. In some of his speeches in Congress, Mr. Stevens had exhibited a most vindicative spirit towards the people of the South, and he continued to do so to the day of his death. The burning was simply in retaliation for the various deeds of barbarity perpetrated by federal troops in some of the southern states. And so was the subsequent burning of Chambersburg. So he goes on. It's interesting that he's not very apologetic in his post-war writings.
Yeah, no, he's...
I like it. There's some interesting reaction in the northern newspapers about the destruction of Thaddeus Stevens' furnace, because he, in some respects in the North, wasn't that popular either, especially in the Democratic newspapers did not support his policies.
Kind of a radical guy,
yeah,
isn't
there's
he?
a Democratic Lancaster County newspaper, and they say, in a speech delivered before the Republican County Convention, which met in Fulton Hall in this city on September 3rd last, Mr. Stevens said, "Abolition, yes. Abolish everything on the face of the earth for this union. Free every slave. Slay every traitor. Burn every rebel mansion. If these things are necessary to preserve the temple of freedom to the world and our prosperity."
Well, basically, that's what we did.
And the paper said, "Curses like chickens come home to roost," so says the old proverb, and Mr. Stevens has had it verified his entire destruction of his ironworks. Here's my favorite. This is from a southern newspaper, and this guy's writing from Hagerstown, and he learned that Juba Early's march to Gettysburg, and he destroyed Thaddeus Stevens' furnace on the way. All honest men throughout the world will be rejoiced to hear that the inalignant demigod and abolitionist, I can't even say that word, Thaddeus Stevens of Pennsylvania has received some of his punishment due for his enormous crimes against the happiness of the human race.
Oh, man.
He owns a large iron works and mill in Adams County on the border, which I am informed have been utterly destroyed. His machinery, aqueducts, buildings, and supplies for his operatives, including, it is said, 20,000 pounds of bacon, have been swept away. Amen will be the involuntary exclamation of every lover of justice and every foe of hypocrisy. Good stuff.
I love the way you read these.
Okay.
You gotta love the 20,000 pounds of bacon, though. That sounds like heaven to me.
I think that was taken on June 23rd, and it was not destroyed. It was used by the Confederate Army.
Now, and but they stole a lot of stuff from there, right? Before they destroyed it, right?
So they visited the furnace 3 times. Let's go to the next slide.
Hey, we're here
Since
again.
we have Thaddeus Stevens. They came on the 16th, Albert Jenkins. They returned on the 23rd at the advance of Juba Early's division. And then on June 25th, the night of June 25th, June 26th is when they burned the furnace.
Okay.
And you know what's interesting? And you don't learn this until much later when you get these Thaddeus Stevens biographies. You know, the Confederates surely didn't know it. Thaddeus Stevens was at the furnace on June 16th when the rebels rode up.
Really?
Yeah, and he got on a horse, rode to Shippensburg, got on the train, and got out of there.
Well, he was a target.
They almost
had him.
Almost had him. Can you imagine if the Confederates had captured Thaddeus Stevens?
That would have been interesting. Speak up, what?
That if he would have caught him the day they burned it, he would have cut up the bodies and sent the bones to every state in the Confederacy or something.
Juba Early said that if they had caught him,
they would have killed him.
They would have killed him.
Cut up his body.
Sure.
And sent the bones to every state in the Confederate, or every territory in the Confederacy.
Yeah.
I mean, he was just reviled, but you know.
Yeah, they didn't like him.
It'd be interesting. It would have been interesting to see what would have happened. Okay, so on the morning of June 26th, after the destruction of Thaddeus Stevens' furnace, which apparently was burned by, I think I haven't accounted, it's Colonel French that's put in charge of burning it, the 17th Virginia Cavalry. So they head out across the mountain range, and they were on old Route 30. New Route 30 was not built yet.
Right.
So they head out, once you pass, if you're coming from Caledonia, once you pass Mr. Ed's, there's a little road that goes off to the left.
Old 30.
And then it veers off and cuts across in front of you to the right and goes down by that barn,
Yep.
that area we call Newman's.
Why do we call it
I don't know.
Newman's? Oh, okay.
Because of Seinfeld. But it's a Newman's Tavern at that location.
So that's where that would have basically tied into
Old Route 30,
New Route 30 today, going towards Caledonia.
Yeah.
That old road, and that's the road that goes past the Cashtown.
That's right. So they pass by Newman's, and they ride down through the gap, the same route that the 14th Virginia Cavalry used to chase the Ryle Rebels Adams County Cavalry on June 23rd, just 3 days later. And they go by the Willow Springs Hotel, where the bushwhacker was drinking, and they come to an intersection. And they had no way of knowing it, but that is a very important intersection in the history of Adams County. The road straight ahead goes to Cashtown, and that road was laid out in about 1815, give or take a few, when exactly it was opened up, 1815. To the left, the road goes down, and it goes out across through Hilltown, and it goes out to Mummersburg, and then out to Goldenville, and out towards Hunterstown.
So sort of like northeast.
Yeah, and that is the old Blackscap Road that was laid out in 1747. That's the road across which George Washington passed when he came through Adams County coming back from the Whiskey Rebellion.
Okay.
So Juba really doesn't know it, but he's following the same road that George Washington passed along. And so at that intersection, apparently Juba Early gets word. Now, is it from the locals? Probably not. Is it from a scout he sent ahead? But he learns that a force of militia has marched out of Gettysburg, and they're formed somewhere near Marsh Creek ahead of him.
Okay.
So in his autobiography, which is written years later. Juba Early says that at this point, he decided to separate his force. And he's going to send Gordon's brigade straight ahead towards the militia with the 35th Virginia Battalion of Cavalry, about 200 men, in front of that brigade.
Okay.
And then the other 3 brigades in his column with the artillery will actually take the Hilltown Road and march to Mummersburg. And he says that he's going to swing them around to attack the rear of the militiamen while Gordon hits them head on. I don't buy this for a moment.
Why not?
I think he would have separated his force at that junction anyway. He wants to send the men across Adams County on 2 parallel roads. And besides that, there's not going to be any militia there by the time the other 3 brigades get in a position to outflank them. They're gone. They're going to be gone.
Okay.
And I think he probably knows that. Okay. So let's go to the next slide, Eric. It's a slide of a house. It is the Brook Tavern. Oh, and I didn't mention this, but if we go back one slide, do you see I have in black, I have circled Mary Brook. Do you see how she's a near neighbor of Henry Hahn, the bushwhacker, on that? Mm. But if we go to the next one now, the house, that's the Widow Brook's Tavern. Her husband had died, and she was running the tavern with her sons and daughters at the time of the Civil War. And Juba Early stops at the tavern and goes in. And she has something on the wall that he is really interested in. She has the 1858 Adams County wall map on her wall.
I have that on my wall.
Oh, very good.
I love that one.
So let's see if I can find out where I have my account of this. Now is that you or that was
No,
me?
that was you.
That was me.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's see. It's interesting that I almost felt like I was taunting myself in that
You were taunting. Yeah, that's what happens. You taunt yourself from.
Yeah. I was going to see if I had her age. I don't have her age here, but here's an account written about this, and I want to point out that this account is written by James Watt de Peyster in 1866.
Okay.
So this is 3 years after the battle. This is written. And it's published in a book in 1867. When Early came along on June 26, he stopped at the Widow Brooks, a clever hostess, or clever hostess. I'm sorry, hostess, on a side road parallel to the Chambersburg Pike. Like many residents, she owned a capital map of Adams County, which showed all the roads, the farms, the dwellings, etc. These maps were sought out by our own cavalry and served as very reliable guides. Early asked the widow what she had paid for her map, and when she answered $5, and that's awesome because we know they were sold for $5 originally. It's in the newspaper. But declined to sell it, he called upon one of his staff for that amount in greenbacks, handed the money over to Mrs. Brook, and then cut out the topographical center, leaving here the illustrations which encompass the map part like a frame. The widow, a right pleasant woman, must have a grim humor of her own. For now, hanging up in the mutilated center of the map, she has inserted in the vacant space a printed list of the rebel dead at Gettysburg.
Oh, man. Nice. I like this chick. That's pretty cool.
So we know that this account is accurate because in 1905, there's actually an article in the Gettysburg Star and Sentinel that talks about this map. This is 1905. A most interesting relic and one whose existence is known to but a few citizens of Adams County is an old map of Adams County now in the possession of Harrison Brook, who lives about above Cashtown. It is one of the maps gotten out in 1858 by G.M. Hopkins, and during the Civil War, it hung on a wall in a bar room in the Brook Tavern, which was conducted by Peter Brook. He had died, and Mary was running it, the father of the present owner of the relic. When Juba Early made his famous raid through southern Pennsylvania in June of 1863, he stopped at the Little Mountain Tavern for a refreshment one hot day, and on entering the bar room, his glance fell on the map. Realizing the great help this would be to him in leading the troops through the strange and hostile land, Early took his penknife out and cut out the portion of the map which describes Gettysburg and the surrounding country. From that day, the mutilated map has never been taken down and still hangs on the wall of the room which was once the old tavern.
Wow.
So until at least 1905,
That's
this
been
thing
sitting up there.
hung on
Do we
the
know what
wall.
happened to it?
No,
Of course not.
no. But you know, it's not there anymore. I've talked to the owners, current owners, the previous owners. Actually,
I wonder where it's got to be somewhere. You don't just get rid of that.
yeah,
Maybe was there a fire or anything?
I don't know. But it's kind of cool. So he got a map from this. Okay, now let's continue on. Oh, there's the next slide is the 1858 Adams County wall map. And you can see what they're talking about, how the center of the map is a topographical map of the county, but then the illustrations and the towns sort of frame it. You
Yeah.
can see how he cut out the center of the map and wasn't interested in the outside of it.
Like pictures of landmark buildings in the different
Wouldn't it
towns
have been
and
easier
stuff.
just to rip the whole map off the wall?
I
though?
think it would have been. Just roll it up.
Okay. Let's go to the next one. Whoop, my slides. I think when he switches his slides, it switches mine too.
You think so?
Yeah, okay.
I don't think it works that way.
I don't know. Okay. So here's a map from Wilbur Nye, the Civil War guy.
Science.
So this is in 1965. Cool. Wilbur Nye did an article in Civil War Times Illustrated on June 26. And it may be my first reading of June 26. And I'm a big fan of Wilbur Nye.
Okay.
I'm saying that because we're going to be critical of him later with one of the viewers' questions, one of the viewer or
The listeners' questions. Yeah.
But you can see here on this map, it's a great map that he drew, that if you look way on the left, on the other side of Hilltown, you see where the road divides, and Juba Early of 3 brigades marches to Mummersburg. And Gordon, with Elijah White's cavalrymen ahead of him, rides directly towards the 26th Pennsylvania Emergency Regiment in Marsh Creek. And you can see that on the map. Now, basically, I'll just do a little overview of what happens. Robert Bell and William Wesley Jennings realize, hey, there's a cloud of smoke coming down the road, and there's a massive Confederate force about to fall on our untested, inexperienced militia. So Jennings decides, you know what? I'm not going to wait for orders from Howard. Let's get the hell out of here.
Good thinking.
So about 40 men are actually on a skirmish line on the other side of Marsh Creek, and they will attempt to hold off White's Comanches. Meanwhile, the other 100 men or 700 men or so head out, and they go up Belmont Road. And Belmont Road today runs into Goldenville Road. And you can see just to the right of where it says Mummersburg, they get onto the Goldenville Road. They actually cross over the Mummersburg Road. They get onto the Goldenville Road, and they head out towards Hunterstown. But they are very, very slow. They are not marching as quickly as Jennings had hoped. Meanwhile, there's a serious skirmish at Marsh Creek. And I believe that's where Luther Slater and one of the other captains, who is unnamed, is actually captured with the skirmish line as White's men approach. No one that we know of is wounded at the Battle of Marsh Creek. So the Confederates overrun and capture all the men on the skirmish line. Meanwhile, and then the 21st, I should mention, the 21st, Robert Bell's cavalry we talked about.
Right.
They actually turn around and race back to Gettysburg at this point. And Howard is there waiting for them when they get there. Howard hops a horse himself also, actually takes a horse from one of the Robert Bell's guys who ends up, kind of being captured because of it, and they ride off to Hanover. So they ride away, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But meanwhile, Juba Early gets a message that the force that they were fighting against has fled and they're not going to be able to catch him. It's interesting. I wonder how the messenger for White gets to Early. Does he ride across Crooked Creek Road to Mummersburg? You guys ever ride on Crooked Creek Road?
Yeah, yeah.
It's
pretty crooked.
Did they go all the way back? And then I'm sure they take one of their side roads to get to Mummersburg.
Yeah.
But meanwhile, Juba Early's 3 brigades are passing through Hilltown and out towards Mummersburg. Now, I should mention it. There's a guy in one of the Virginia regiments, I think he's with Smith's brigade, that says that during the march they passed through a little town uncouthly called by the residents Helltown. And he seems very perplexed by it.
It's that Pennsylvania accent.
Hilltown. So Juba Early runs over to Colonel French, the 17th Virginia Cavalry, and says, hey, head out through Mummersburg and see if you can catch that regiment that is fleeing from that battle site. And you see up on the top of the map, the 17th Virginia Cavalry under French pursue. And when you get to the Belmont-Goldenville Road intersection, and anybody who lives local will know where that is. It's not far from Russell's Tavern, where George Washington spent the night when he was on that road we were talking about. They start picking up stragglers from the long, lengthy march. Can you imagine? These guys already marched like 5 miles that day. They start picking them up along the road. And they cross over the Biglerville Road, which at that time would be called the Newville Road. And they cross over the old Carlisle Road, which is now called Table Rock Road. And just beyond that, at a place called the Whitmer Farm, Colonel Jennings says, okay, they're catching up with us. So he places his men in a line of battle, and we have the Battle of the Whitmer Farm, or the Battle of Goldenville Road, or sometimes you hear it referred to as the Battle of Bailey's Hill. They fire 2 or 3 or 4 volleys at the Southerners. One man in the 26th Pennsylvania Emergency Regiment is wounded in this battle.
Okay.
We do not have any evidence that any of French's guys, the 17th Virginia, are wounded in the fight. Although several guys in the 26th maintain that guys in the 17th Virginia Cavalry were wounded. But we don't have any evidence of that.
Right, okay.
But shots are exchanged. You think about it. If they got, I don't know how many men they lost by that point. Let's say they have 500 men on the firing line and they fire 3 rounds. That's 1,500 bullets. They're probably still out there in the fields around that area.
There you go.
I've never found a bullet there.
Oh, you've looked?
Yeah.
I'm sure they've all been.
So they were fired wildly, so the bullets are probably not
probably in
like,
trees.
Yeah, they're probably not in the right place. And should I mention? I didn't mention this. The whole time we're talking about this day, it's raining. It rains on June 26th.
Yes, yes.
So what ends up happening? After they fire a few rounds, and they're pretty sure that the Confederates are kind of spooked by the fire of all these men. That's a lot of men, 500 men firing at you, and French probably only has a couple hundred guys with him. So the 26th, Jennings says, let's get out of here now. And so they start their retreat. And the 26th Pennsylvania Emergency Regiment, let's see what I have coming up next. Oh, let's go to the next slide. Well, I didn't write, put something in there this nice looking. I'm proud of myself on this map. Here I call it the Battle of Bailey's Hill, because the Bailey family lives at the base of the hill also. Okay. And sometimes it's referred to as that. So you can see they retreat up across country through the area of York Springs, and they retreat back to Harrisburg.
Okay.
The men march for 55 of the next 60 hours. 55 of the next 60 hours.
Okay.
And they make it to Harrisburg. And the whole time, They're convinced the Confederates are about to overtake them and are chasing them the whole way.
So that they camp after a 4-mile march earlier in the day, but they make 55 miles.
Well, 55 hours. 55 out of 60 consecutive hours, they just march until they get to Harrisburg.
Amazing.
I don't know how many miles they covered, but it's a pretty good distance.
Yeah. Yeah, that is a good distance.
And they wanted their plan was to try to get back to the railroad somehow and get back on the train, but they couldn't. They had to go a different way.
But now, did they? Isn't Early with roads somewhere up around there? Or are they not up that way yet?
No, they actually go farther to the east and manage to avoid that.
Okay.
Now, when they get to Harrisburg,
Yeah.
250 of them are missing, and we know that 40 of them are captured at Marsh Creek, or give or take a few.
Right.
170 of them are captured at the Battle of Bailey's Hill. And the next morning, they're gathered in the square of Hunterstown, and Juba Early gives them a lecture. And he lets them go.
Really?
And they march across to Shippensburg, where they're captured by Johnson's division. And Johnson's division, who's on their way back from Carlisle, orders them to take off their shoes. And he steals all the shoes from them, and then they walk barefoot to Harrisburg.
The birth of the shoe myth, right? Is this what you're saying?
Johnson needs shoes.
So wait a sec. So is there an account of Early's lecture to them?
No. But there is a nice little account of Juba Early going to Gettysburg and talking to the other 40 men that were captured at Marsh Creek. Because while the fight for Bailey's Hill is going on, Early then is told by an aide or a staff officer or somebody who wrote up that the Gordon's pushing to Gettysburg. And so Juba Early rides to Gettysburg.
Right, okay.
And when he gets there, of course, we're going to talk about what he does in Gettysburg, but one of the things he does is he gathers the 40 men from the 26th Pennsylvania Emergency Regiment at the courthouse steps.
Right.
And he tells them that it's lucky they ran so quickly or someone might got hurt. And one of the accounts says something like he lectures them and tells them to go home to their mommies.
Yeah.
So Juba Early can be kind of harsh.
Yeah.
You know.
Okay.
Also on this map, I wanted to point out while we're looking at it, you see the line of the Robert Bell's Adams County Cavalry are riding off towards Hanover Junction. And the Philadelphia City Troop, some of them ride up to Hunterstown and then over across through New Oxford and out Route 30. But the Union forces retreat across to Adams County and to get back to, they're on their way to Hanover Junction, and then they go to York, and they're at York when the Confederate troops approach York, and then they go to Wrightsville. And they're there at Wrightsville, all these troops, minus the 26th Emergency Regiment who are on their way to Harrisburg.
Right.
But they get to Wrightsville when the bridge is attacked by Gordon and the bridge is burned.
Okay. But first, Gordon has to get into Gettysburg, right?
That's right.
All right.
So let's go to the next slide.
Well, now, wait, are we going to Gordon right now?
Yeah.
All right, so let's do this, because this is where it gets exciting for the people in Gettysburg. Let's take our break, and then when we come back, we'll finish up what happens in Gettysburg on June 26th with Gordon's brigade visiting for the evening, and then we'll get to everybody's questions, okay? So everybody sit tight. If you're watching on Facebook, you want to ask a question, then get it in the comment section, and we will get to them later. So we will be right back. The season is finally here. 2021 is going to be a great year, and we know that you're going to come down to Gettysburg. And when you do come down to Gettysburg, you got to take a tour with Getty's Bike Tours. Getty's Bike Tours has been in business since 2005. It is the best way to see the battlefield. Why? Because you don't just see the battlefield, you experience the battlefield. Our tours are led by some of the finest licensed battlefield guides out there, and they make sure that you walk away with a full understanding of what happened here on those 3 days in 1863. Here's the best part. Because you're an Addressing Gettysburg listener, you're going to get 15% off when you make your reservation. Now, this discount only applies to tours, so go to gettysbike.com or call 717-752-7752 and book a tour today. There's no better way to see the town you're visiting than to eat your way through it. And there's no better way to eat your way through this town than with Savor Gettysburg food tours. Enjoy a culinary and cultural experience through historic downtown Gettysburg, one delicious bite at a time. Their season runs from April through November with the special Christmas Tastes and Traditions walking food tour during the month of December. So go to SavorGettysburgFoodTours.com and enter promo code AG2021 to receive $5 off your tour. Eat, Walk, get a taste of history with Savor Gettysburg. Have you noticed our revamped website at addressinggettysburg.com? Well, that's the fine work of a man named Mike Stretch, and he also redid our logo for us. Both of them I originally designed, and both of them were originally horrible. But now they're nice, and that's all thanks to Mike. Mike has an awesome t-shirt company called Heritage Depot. There you'll find great designs based on Gettysburg and the Civil War with t-shirts and other types of merchandise. So go to heritage-depot.com and spruce up your Gettys Nerd wardrobe. That's heritage-depot.com. Our favorite bookstore in Gettysburg is For the Historian, located at 42 York Street. Isn't it, Eric?
You're darn tootin', Matt.
It's because they have the best selection of Civil War books in Gettysburg, both new and used, and online they have even more books to choose from.
But Matthew, what if the Civil War is simply not my thing?
Not a problem, my fine four-fendered friend. This is For the Historian, after all. They cover history from the ancient world to the 21st century with a strong selection of World War II and American Revolution books.
It's astounding how they squeeze thousands of titles from Osprey, Savas Beatty, UNC Press, and more into their store.
And it's also astounding how you and I both squeeze into our pants every day. Well, handsome, they have a warehouse too, and that's where they keep all those books that are available online at forthehistorian.com. And folks, if you go to forthehistorian.com now and order books until you're blue in the face, be sure you mention that you heard about them on Addressing Gettysburg in the Note to Seller box, and they will refund your shipping costs.
What if I prefer to browse in the store and don't want to go online to get my book?
Great question, Doodlebug. Just mention Addressing Gettysburg at checkout, and they'll take 20% off the retail price of your item. So go to forthehistorian.com, stop by 42 York Street, or call 717-685-5207. That's forthehistorian.com or 717-685-5207. Gettysburg, A Nation Divided mobile app is relaunching this summer. Gettysburg, A Nation Divided is an award-winning mixed reality mobile application using augmented reality technology. It transports users into the most crucial moments in the Battle of Gettysburg, the turning point of the Civil War. Users can listen and watch historic figures share their stories as lifelike animated avatars, traverse 360-degree image sequences of the battlefield. Its cinematic battle sequences are narrated by actor Scott Eastwood. The mobile app is available for free on iOS and Android. It's designed to be used anywhere, at home, at school, at the park, or at Gettysburg National Military Park. It uses GPS to help guide you through your journey to see the stories and events unfold at the exact location where they occurred. So go into your phone's app store and get it now for free. That's Gettysburg, A Nation Divided.
You're listening to the Addressing Gettysburg podcast with Matt Cavalry.
And we are back, ladies and gentlemen. Once again, those of you watching on Facebook Live, put your questions in the comments if you've gotten any. If you have any. And we are going to go on now. Tim, where are we now? We're Gordon's Brigade's about to enter Gettysburg. Is that right?
So, I'd like to point out, though, we have an image up here of the dedication ceremony of the 26th Pennsylvania Emergency Militia Monument in 1892. And, you might detect a bit of sarcasm in my voice when I talk about these guys. And, I realize that these men were untrained. They had no idea what they were getting themselves into. And the concept of inexperienced soldiers, especially, like the college students,
right,
stopping battle-hardened Confederate veterans that have been serviced for a couple years is just ridiculous.
Yeah. But what else could they do?
Yeah.
Right? You got to feel like you're doing something.
Yeah. Oh, I think so.
Yeah.
And in later years, the members of the 26th Pennsylvania Emergency Regiment struggled to find their place in the history of the war. Many looked upon the whole episode as a fiasco. One gentleman, one veteran of the unit, said it was picturesque and interesting, perhaps, but without substantial consequence. Others, however, and this maybe is why I make a little bit of fun of them, went absolutely overboard. And one of them was Samuel Pennypacker, who later served as the governor of Pennsylvania from 1901 to 1906. Mm-hmm. He made all sorts of wild, exaggerated claims as to the importance of the encounter. Henry Richards, who wrote about it later of Company A, said the men in the 26th were the first troops to oppose the entrance of the rebels into Pennsylvania, which of course is not true.
Not true.
The first to meet the enemy at Gettysburg, and the first to draw blood in that historic combat. Whose blood? Their own?
Yeah.
He further claimed that they materially delayed the advance of Lee's army and saved Harrisburg from capture.
Wow. The whole army stopped for that one regiment.
He concluded, with the knowledge of events which we now possess, who can deny that these occurrences were not instrumental in the salvation of the entire nation? Oh, come on. Let me suggest that the presence of the 26th Emergency Regiment and it actually sped up the Southern advance.
Right.
Not slowed it down.
Okay, why is that? How's that?
Because they were chasing those guys.
Right.
They went faster than they would have.
Right.
It didn't slow down the Confederate advance.
No.
So anyway, it is an interesting episode in the battle, and the veterans are very proud of their role in the monument, in the role in the battle, and they have a monument there at the Beaufort Avenue and the edge of Chambersburg Street, and you can see their monument today.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So let's go to the next slide, the map again. Now we talked about the 26th Emergency Regiment retreat to Harrisburg. Bell's Adams County Cavalry and the Philadelphia City Troop, I should mention, come storming through the town. The 26th Pennsylvania Emergency Regiment had come in on train, remember, that morning. Their trains were sitting on the tracks on the eastern side of town, and a detachment of the 26th was in the town of Gettysburg guarding the trains. When the Confederates, when Bell's Cavalry rides by and the Philadelphia City Troop ride by, and they actually stay there, and there's a small skirmish between them and the advance of the Confederates as they approach their outpost on the eastern edge of town. So there's actually gunfire in the town between opposing forces on June 26th.
Interesting. Okay. Now, so am I remembering this correctly that some of the Comanches were chasing Bell himself out of town?
Yes. Now, it's difficult to say how closely the White's battalion is to Bell's men when they ride out of town.
Right. Okay.
One thing is interesting. When Bell comes down York Street, we're going to talk about this in a moment, he urges his men to disperse, and if they want to go home, that they can. And a couple guys on the York Road at Rock Creek, we're talking about near, I always use Beer Mart as a, I can't use Beer Mart anymore.
It's gone.
Yeah. But right there at the bridge.
What is that now? Like a rent-a-center?
The rent. Yeah.
Is it a print shop now?
Yeah, Gettysburg Printing.
Gettysburg. Okay.
Okay.
But right there, a couple of the guys leave the column and ride down along Rock Creek, including a guy named Leitner, who lives in southern Adams County, and a guy named Sandow. That's where they leave the column and ride along Rock Creek south.
Oh.
They don't turn at the square on Baltimore Street and ride up Baltimore Street. They go out to Rock Creek and ride out along Rock Creek to get back to their homes.
Interesting. But
we'll talk about that in a minute.
Okay.
So let's go to the next map.
Put my hand right up there and just shut me down.
That's right. We can't talk about that yet.
Not yet.
So
I have a plan.
White's men, the 35th Virginia Battalion of Cavalry, stop outside the town.
Okay.
And I think it's Lieutenant Stricklander's account, and they talk about what they're going to do, and they would like to make a bold entrance to the town. So they come up with a little plan. They're going to ride into town. They're going to shoot their rifles in the air. And so they come riding down Chambersburg Street into the square and ride around the square in a circle and fire their pistols in the air. And it scares the citizens to death.
Sure.
And it's a little show of force. There's a couple accounts by kids, like Gates Fonestock, who said it reminded him of a Wild West show at the circus.
Right, right.
And
of course, he says that later in his life because Wild West shows aren't a thing yet.
Yeah, he thought it was really humorous and that they were all putting on a big show. But the Southern Army rides into the town. They capture the town. And this is an 1863 photograph of Chambersburg Street from the square. And there's a little photograph of Elijah White off to the left there.
So that the house, the brick house that we're looking at there is where the bank is today.
That's right. And at the time of the battle, it was George Arnold's store and Farmers and Mechanics Bank. George Arnold was a banker.
So that was a bank.
Yes. And so it's ACNB Bank.
Today it is.
Yeah, not to be confused with Adams County National Bank. They're the ACNB Bank. Even though the B stands for bank. They don't like that when I talk about that with them. They're nice people. So this is Baltimore Street from an 1863 photograph, and there's John L. Schick's store, John Lawrence Schick.
Okay.
Not to be confused with Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain.
Schick. Yeah.
And you can see the courthouse there in the distance. And then the next slide we have is William T. King. Is that the one you have up, Eric? Yep. William T. King was part of Robert Bell's Adams County Cavalry. And a bunch of the men in that unit, we're talking about 40 guys, are from Gettysburg. There's a guy who lives on York Street, and he rides by his wife and children as he's fleeing through the town. Mm-hmm. William King lives on York Street. And something had happened to his leg. Maybe he was suffering a little bit from an injury on one of the rides, and he was at his house when the other members of the cavalry came riding by, and his wife said,
sorry. Go ahead.
I'm sure they can see that. Yeah. And King goes running off the porch, jumps on his horse, and rides out of town with the rest of the men. And again, when these men ride through the town, they're leaving their wives and children in the town that's about to be overrun by the Southerners. And as we all know, the Southerners eat babies. I like that from Chambersburg. Good account. So to go to the next slide, William T. King has a tailor shop in the center of the town.
Yeah, this is a cool picture.
Now, we don't know when this has occurred, but William T. King's granddaughter gave this sign. Oh, wait a minute. I'm wrong. William T. King's daughter gave this sign to the Adams County Historical Society. William King's daughter.
And it's got 2 bullet holes in it.
Yeah.
3. Where's the third?
4.
Oh, down at the bottom there. 4. Where's the 4th? Oh, it's a small one there.
Okay.
Little pistol shot.
So they were not fans of William T. King.
No, I guess not.
And we're not exactly sure where the sign hung, but he had a tailor shop in George Arnold's store. So we probably think it was probably in the middle, the center of the town on the square on the side of George Arnold's building.
So now wait, is he related to Sarah King?
Yes, Sarah Barrett King is his wife.
It's his wife.
Yes.
Now, there's a story about her wanting to see the kids as they're chasing Bell past their house.
And she tells them to hide?
No, and I think either he or her father, would that make sense? Her father would be there, and he would be saying, get those kids inside. Yeah. She says, no, I want them to see history.
Yeah, I remember that, yeah.
And now her house is a Chinese buffet.
That's right. It's at the site of what is now Lee's Buffet. That's where William T. King lived.
Yes.
Recently, at the Adams County Historical Society, one of our volunteers was going through the William T. King letters. We have letters that William T. King's wife writes to him while he's in the Army and vice versa.
Right.
And there was this one-page letter, front and back, that had been slipped into between some other letters. And it was written by William T. King's 10-year-old daughter, and it looked like it was written on like July 5th or 6th, 1863. And it says, Dad, we are hoping you come back soon. There are Confederate soldiers around the house. We have Confederate wounded in our house. There was a guy here yesterday trying to get me to help him locate the body of his son, all kinds of stuff like this. Really neat letter from right after the battle. So the story is William T. King's daughter, Mary, marries William McLean's son, William Archibald McLean, who becomes the editor of the Gettysburg Compiler. Oh. And he prints his mother-in-law's reminiscence of the battle.
Okay.
Sarah Barrett King.
Oh, all right.
So that's how all that happens.
He marries one of the kids that she keeps out on the porch to witness history.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yes.
Okay.
Good. It's been a while since I read that account. I remember she takes her family, flees to town during the battle, ends up at maybe the Reinhardt house on the East Cavalry field.
Okay.
And stays there during the fighting and then comes back into town. And it's a really good account. And remember also that her father, John Barrett, is the constable of the town that John Burns detests.
Oh, yeah. You were saying that on the Burns.
Rival.
Yes. Okay.
Let's go to the next one.
Interesting.
Now we have is a picture of George Washington Sandeau and his wife Diane. So Sandeau and another of his comrades, Leitner, who lived in southern Adams County, not to be confused with Nathaniel Leitner, who lives along the Baltimore Pike. A lot of people confuse that. They left the column at Rock Creek on the York Road and rode down Rock Creek. I don't know if there's a path all the way for horses, but there's a lane that goes along the side of Rock Creek for much of the distance from the Baltimore Pike. But they ride to the Baltimore Pike. And the story is, and of course told somewhat by James McAllister of McAllister's Mail, that as the troops are coming to the Baltimore Pike and hopping over the fence, White's Comanches come riding out of town down the Baltimore Pike. Okay. When White's guys get to the center of the town, he orders his men to ride on the different arteries and chase whatever columns they can find. And these guys are going down the Baltimore Pike. You might know that they passed through the Baltimore Pike Tilly Pierce. Oh, we're going to talk about that in a moment. Yeah. But they chased Sam Wade, Jenny Wade's sister, down, taking Jenny Wade's brother yeah. taking horses out of the town. They capture him around Evergreen Cemetery. They fire at people in Evergreen Cemetery that are fleeing the Confederate advance, but some of them keep going down the pike. And as luck would have it, a detachment of Confederates is riding down the pike as Sandeau and Leitner are coming up onto the Baltimore Pike out of the area of Culp's Hill. And there's a brief exchange of fire, and George Washington Sandeau is killed, a member of Robert Bell's Adams County Cavalry, the first Union soldier to be killed in Adams County during the Gettysburg campaign.
And Diane is a widow.
Yeah, and Diane's a widow, and she has a collective pension.
So Sandeau, see, I always pictured it that Sandeau was chased down, but he actually skirted the whole area and thought he was getting away. And, oh, poor guy.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. Okay. I didn't realize that they went out on basically 30 East and then cut down on Rock Creek. Now, you said there's a road or a path that goes along Rock Creek? Can you still find it?
Yeah. In 1867, there's photographs taken along Rock Creek. And I don't know if they took one of the well-established paths or there's maybe another path along the creek. But the Tyson brothers, I should say C.J. Tyson, and probably William Tipton and his associate Myers took photographs, Peter Myers, along Rock Creek. And one of them shows people swimming in Rock Creek. And we know there's kind of a path that leads up to the area of the swimming hole. So, I don't know exactly, because you think of it as really rough area to be riding a horse all the way along Rock Creek.
Right. I mean, in Rock Creek maybe, but...
Yeah.
But I mean, it was different back then.
And it was deeper, too.
Yeah.
By all accounts, it's deeper.
Really?
Remember, it's raining, too. And
so it's up.
The dam keeps the water backed up.
Mm-hmm.
So the next slide is Tilly Pierce. And many of the civilians wrote accounts of the battle, and virtually all the booklets on the battle also mention things that happened on June 26th. And in 1888, Tilly Pierce Allman recorded her reminiscence at Gettysburg, or what a girl saw and heard of the battle.
Or the girl who saw everything.
Yeah. And she has an interesting account on June 26, and I'm sure for people who have heard my discussions on her before, I know Veronica has, I'm using that very complimentary towards Tilly Pierce. I think I do it for two reasons. One is everybody thinks that we're going to think that Tilly Pierce is a heroine because she wrote about it.
Right.
You know, I mean, so she wrote about it.
Yeah.
Not everybody who writes an account is a heroine. But
But Tim, she helped the wounded.
yeah, she helped the wounded. She did. So I kind of look at her as a spoiled little brat.
Yeah, she kind of does sound like a spoiled little brat. And she's writing this years and years later, right?
Oh yeah, well, 25 years later. So it's actually one of the earlier accounts as opposed to some of the later accounts.
Okay.
But you know, also number two, she badmouths Jenny Wade in her book.
And that's really
And that's
what it's
not going
about.
to sit well with me.
You're a big fan of Jenny Wade.
Yeah. And so, and then the whole episode with her and Jenny Wade's brother just bothers me. The whole thing just bothers me.
Now, why does that bother you? Now, tell everybody the episode and why does it bother you?
Okay, so I think off the top of my head, you could look in the exact date. I think Sam Wade is 13. I'm thinking he's 13.
I believe so.
And Sam Wade works for Tilly Pierce's family. James Pierce is a butcher. He works his fingers to the bone so his daughter Tilly can go to the finest finishing school in the area. So,
Which is whose school? Mrs. Eister's?
Mr. Eister's, yeah,
Oh, is
Mrs.
it
Eister's
okay.
Academy. And so on June 26, Tilly is upset because the Confederates are coming to town and her pet horse may be captured.
Oh.
So the father sends Sam Wade with the family's horses to try to get out of town. Of course, it's too late. The Southern Army overrun the town. And so they send this young boy with the horses riding out of town. Meanwhile, Jenny is at her sister Georgia's house because Georgia is giving birth to a child that day.
Right.
The family has things to do.
Right around the time that they're all coming through town,
Right
correct?
at the time, yeah. She, according to the best account we have, I think the child's born about 3 p.m. and this is all happening about 3:30,
Mm-hmm.
maybe around 3 o'clock.
Sure.
So anyway, the Confederates come over the hill and they chase Sam Wade up the hill, Cemetery Hill, and they fire pistols at him and order him to halt. And then they capture Sam Wade and they take him as a prisoner and take him back into the center of the town. And Jenny comes running out of the house and she sees the Confederate cavalry who've just been firing their pistols at her brother, taking him up the street. And, you know, she chases him up the street, and then there's Tilly Pierce and her mother sitting outside. And, of course, Tilly's really upset now because Sam, the idiot, allowed the family pet to be captured.
Right, that moron.
And
yeah.
so Jenny just looks over at him and says, "Hey, what are you thinking?
Yeah.
You know, you put my
I think she
brother's
says,
life in danger."
if something happens to Sam, I don't know what I'll do with you folks, or something like that.
I think I would have done something.
And she
to him,
gives
too.
a little bit of
That's right. She did
a
the
little
little
sass
finger
there. She's like,
finger
something
snap.
happens to Sam, I don't know what I'll do with you folks.
And then Tilly Pierce goes on in her book to say this was all done because Tilly, her sympathies are not where they should have been.
Right.
You know, inferring that she's some kind of Southern sympathizer.
Jenny, not
Jenny.
Tilly. Jenny's sympathies aren't where they should have been.
Jenny's sympathies shouldn't. Yeah,
And a poor dead girl. Been dead 25 some odd years, and you're telling the story, and, you know, leave her alone. Let her rest in peace.
Yeah.
I'm with you.
And then the other thing about it is, you know, Jenny has a boyfriend in the Union Army. Jenny was working on her brother's uniform when word came that the rebel cavalry were approaching Gettysburg, and he was her brother's one of the ones that fled out of town with Robert Bell to get away just before this whole incident occurred. She's trying to help her mother, you know, deliver her, you know, nephew.
She's got her hands full
at the house, and now she's
planning her bread recipe for the next
right.
couple days.
She's getting her bread ready. And then she has to go back up to her sister Georgia's house, where Georgia has just given birth to an infant, tell her mother, hey, they've taken Sam prisoner, and we have to go up to the, you know, square and hope we can get him back. And they go up to the square, and they get him back. And then Tilly infers that while that while Jenny and her mother are getting him back, that they're telling, the Elijah White everything they can about the Union families in town.
Right.
And then somebody comes to her house and says, "We hear you have a brother in the Union Army." Well, Jenny has a brother in the Union Army too.
Right.
It's just a whole thing.
I feel bad for Jenny because
just upsets me.
They weren't well off, right? They were. Would you say they were poor, or just they were poor? They were poor.
Yeah.
And you know how people talk, and I'm guessing people. People talked about her anyway. We know Jack Skelly's mom was talking about her to Jack.
That's right.
And all these rumors and everything, and the poor girl's sister is giving birth. She's doing her brother's uniform, and her mom's helping with the kid being born, and then the brother gets kidnapped and then taken back, and she has to deal with all this crap. And then to top it all off, she's only like 3 days away from getting killed. Well, a week away.
Yeah. No, she doesn't know that at the time.
No, she doesn't, but we do.
Now, Georgia, her boyfriend, or I should say her husband, is also in the Army.
Yeah.
So Tilly Pierce, though, having said all that, it's one of the best books written by a civilian about their experiences during the battle. So having said that.
Mm-hmm. Having said so.
Yeah.
Okay.
So then
all that Tilly bashing,
Sarah,
and now
all
it's
the
pretty
Tilly
good.
bashing is done.
Okay.
So
all right, good.
then we have the next slide is Sarah Broadhead, who, of course, recorded her reminiscence of the battle in a diary afterwards. And there's lots of quotes. I'm sure I could find one by her. But she describes the Confederate entrance to town on June 26th, and also the Confederates playing Dixie in the town square. So let's go to the next one.
Sarah looks to me like a depressed person. She's very depressed.
Here's Baltimore Street in 1888. Okay.
Very nice.
And then, I have Sally Myers Stewart, who also...
Wait, those of you watching at home, the blue and gray is on the left. Is that the same building that they just modified?
Yes.
It is.
Yes.
So it is the same
Blue and Gray
building.
Bar and Grills on the left. Do you know, I have not been back to the Blue and Gray since, the COVID rule restrictions ended. And that means I have not had a General Meade in like a year and a half.
I know. I usually get the John Buford.
For the listeners who don't know what we're talking about, they have hamburgers that have something to do with military figures in the battle.
Yeah.
The General Meade is a hamburger with a cheesesteak sub on top.
It's delicious. I just had one like last week too. It was phenomenal.
They're so good. And then I get the one that I think it's the Hancock or the Buford. It's
Hancock
like a blue cheese.
With avocado.
No, then it's the Buford. I think it's got like blue cheese. And, oh my God! And it just drips all over the place. It's fantastic.
And the Long Street has peanut butter.
Oh yes. Yeah.
I'm glad we can
let's go there after
food.
this.
Yeah, let's all go to the Blue and Gray Bar and Grill. But do you see also since we're talking about that building has not changed that much?
No, nor has the other one, on the right, House of Bender or whatever that
House of Time it's called now.
House of Time.
It used to be called the House of Bender, and at the time of the battle it was J.L. Schick's store.
Schick.
John Lawrence Schick smoked 21 cigars on the first day of the battle, his personal record.
Wow.
That's the kind of stuff he wrote in his account.
I'm sure he was stressed.
So Sally Myers Stewart. Let's go to the next one. Sally Myers Stewart. She also has a diary around the time of the battle, and you can read her reminiscences of the incidents that occurred here and in the fight. There are a good amount of civilian recollections of June 26th. Let's go to the next one. So Juba Early rode to Mummersburg. Now remember, 3 of his brigades came through Mummersburg.
Right.
The Louisiana Tigers actually marched down the Mummersburg Road, and a lot of people don't realize this, camped in the area of the Peace Light on the evening of June 26. But the other 2 brigades, Hoke's Brigade and Smith's Brigade, camped back at Mummersburg. And we'll save that. I have one account I want to read from that. We'll save that. But Juba Early, once he learned Gettysburg was captured by first White's Comanches and then Gordon's men moved into Gettysburg, he came down into the town himself and he requisitioned the town supplies from the town. And this is an interesting story. Here's a sketch. And it's Juba Early in front of a pump and you can see it's raining, and there's some guys with an umbrella there, and he's on his horse, and he's writing a demand for supplies. When I was a kid, the big book that everyone had was the American Heritage Centennial History of the American Civil War by Bruce Catton. And this sketch appears in that book as Juba Early writing a requisition at Hagerstown. It's a Charles Reed sketch from the Library of Congress. I went to the Library of Congress. A friend of mine wrote a book about Charles Reed, Eric Campbell.
Okay.
I don't know if you've had Eric. Eric is a ranger in the Shenandoah Valley now. In my personal opinion, the best interpretive ranger I have ever met.
Really?
He's just incredible.
Okay.
Oh, he is very good, yeah.
So,
I remember him being here.
Eric was writing a book on Charles Reed. He pulled his papers, and I was at the Library of Congress, probably researching, as Gary Edelman would say, some stupid civilian crap.
Okay.
And I think I was going through the Edward McPherson papers or the Thaddeus Stevens papers at the Library of Congress. And I remember the one thing I remember is Eric turned over the box and there was something jingling around in it.
Right.
And Charles Reed's Medal of Honor fell out of the box.
Oh, wow.
Like it was in the
It was
box
just like
with
somewhere.
the rest of the papers laying there. But he was going through the sketches, and he did a book on Charles Reed. You can see his book. It's really good. And he's a member of the 9th Massachusetts Battery at Gettysburg. And this sketch came, he turned over in the sketch. And on it, as big as day, it said Gettysburg. And I realized that for whatever reason, they'd incorrectly used this sketch in Centennial History of the Civil War. And this is Juba Early writing out his demand on June 26th in front of the pump. And it matches the account we have exactly.
And the account is what?
So let's go to the next one. So Juba Early rides into the town. He rides up. Oh, I'm falling down now.
Jesus. We got to get a new stool.
He rides up
Sorry.
to the water pump. His horse is drinking out of the trough. And
Okay.
And he sits down on his horse and he writes a demand for supplies. And he asks for bacon and flour and hats and 500 pairs of shoes, or in lieu of $10,000 in cash. And we know, according to the account, that he's sitting in front of Moses McLean's house when he writes out the requisition, and there is the pump. There is another sketch at the Library of Congress, which I did not, at the time I saw it, you weren't allowed to, nobody had a cell phone.
Right.
And you weren't allowed to make Xerox copies of these sketches.
Just
But there was
damage
another sketch of the pump that showed Moses McLean's door behind it. And clearly it was that pump and that door. And Moses McLean lives right there in the third house from the square in this view.
So that's on Baltimore Street.
It's on Baltimore
it's like
Street.
what, 2 doors down from the house of.
That's
What
right.
is it called now? Time.
House of Time.
Yes.
And it's now the Christmas house.
Oh, okay.
That's the Christmas house, the White House.
Yeah. All right. So there you go.
Oh, no. The red brick house is the Christmas house. And then beside it is the cigar shop.
The cigar shop. Yeah.
Okay, so let's go to the next one. Here's an 1888 view of Baltimore Street looking down the same stretch. Oh, let me see. I'm messing up here.
Yeah, the Fonstock house looks like they got those extra floors on by that point, right?
They added some extra stores, not to the Fonstock house, but I think that extra story, that's where the Woolworths was for a while.
Oh.
And they tore it down, and now there's some other modern buildings there, but that's right next to the alley. Let's go to the next one, and I think I have John Burns coming up. Is that correct? Mm-hmm. So according to John Burns, Juba Early writes the requisition and gives it to John Burns. And John Burns takes the requisition. He wants to find the mayor, but the mayor of Gettysburg, Robert Martin, has fled with his horses, the Burgess. So it's kind of like the Burgermeister, the Burgess.
Yeah.
So the president of the town council is David Kendallhart. Mm-hmm. And John Burns takes the demand for supplies to David Kendallhart. And David Kendallhart writes a letter. And the letter, we have a copy of it, and it says basically, that we knew you were coming. We sent all the supplies out of town. The bank has sent our money out. We don't have any money. We don't have any supplies. We'll open up the shop doors and you can look in and you can see we're telling the truth, but we just don't have any. We can't meet your demands.
Right.
So then John Burns takes the message back to Juba Early. And according to David Kendallhart, Juba Early reads the letter, gives it back to John Burns. John Burns gives the original letter back to David Kendallhart. So David Kendallhart ends up with the actual note written by Juba Early and the letter he wrote in reply. And then he saves them as souvenirs of the day.
So this story of Early being in front of Kendallhart's house.
Moses McLean's house.
No.
I'm sorry.
There's a version that Early's in front of Kendallhart's house reading off the list of demands, and his daughter supposedly took this all down. But is that malarkey?
Probably not. Yes, probably.
Okay. Where does that come from?
I think that comes from the Kendallharts. I think
so they said that.
I think they're probably telling the story.
And they're just excluding John Burns' role.
Yeah.
And they're just saying, okay,
yeah.
poor John.
And it's not only that, there's like 4 versions of this.
Yes.
Like the town council gets together and meets in the square at, I think, Stevenson's law office, which is where the pub is. Okay. And there's a whole account by members there that they talk about what they should do. And they tell Kendallhart to write the letter. Mm-hmm. So there's several different versions of what happened, and it may be like all these things may have a little shred of truth in them.
Ladies and gentlemen, though, in the audience, isn't it cool when you're sitting here and eating at the pub or at the Blue and Gray? You know, you look at these things, you're thinking of restaurants, everything, but all this stuff played out right in and around those buildings.
Yeah. So here, let's go to the next one. And here is, because I mentioned that the family kept them, Tipton shot a photograph of the requisition for supplies in the 1880s or 90s. And here is, do you have the requisition of supplies up? Yep. You can see it says like 60 pounds, or is that 60 barrels of flour, 7,000 pounds of bacon, I think.
Yeah.
1,200 barrels of flour. I don't know what the top one is. Your guess is as good as mine.
Looks like Jude.
Yeah, 600 pounds of coffee, 10,000 pounds of salt, and I think, believe it or not, I think it's 40 barrels of sauerkraut. At least that's what one interpretation is. We have these people that say what the message says, but I got to tell you, I'm having trouble reading it.
Yeah.
1,000 pairs of shoes, 500 hats.
Well, that makes sense.
So he asked for shoes.
Yeah.
And on the back of it, it says, or in lieu of $10,000 in cash. So what is the top one? I forget.
I'm trying to remember. To me, it looks like 60, Jude or Juice.
60 something of something.
60
something of something. Okay. So the story is, now let's go to the next one. So I have a picture of David Kendallhart and then the letter he wrote in reply. This letter was eventually sold by the family in a local relic shop, and someone bought it who ended up donating it to the Gettysburg Foundation, who gave it to the Gettysburg National Military Park. And currently, let's say we're hoping that they lend it to us on a temporary loan to the Adams County Historical Society for our new museum when it opens up, the original demand.
Oh, cool.
It's never been really displayed.
Nice.
Now let's go to the next one. I have a picture of a guy standing on Baltimore Street.
This is interesting.
This is Joel B. Danner, who ran a museum in the 1880s and 90s. People would come to town into the early 1900s, and he had a museum filled with relics that were associated with the battle. And here's a photograph of Danner in front of the Fonestock House, and the square is back behind us. And that's actually a pump that is, you see where the People's Drugstore, that's a pump. And that is a trough, which they're pumping water into. Now, we know that's not the right pump. We know that the pump is farther up the street near the square. But can you see I circled here the requisition of supplies, and the note that Juba Early wrote is on that display, and he had it in his museum. Obviously, he just brought it out for this photograph and hung it on the pump.
Right.
But that trough in that photograph is in 1910, it was given to the Jenny Wade House Museum as part of their relic display.
Yeah.
And just recently, I made a sort of a deal with Max Felty to actually have that put on display at the Adams County Historical Society's new museum.
Oh, that'd be cool.
The trough that supposedly Juba Early's horse drank out of when he wrote the requisition for supplies.
Nice.
So it still exists.
That's pretty neat.
And now let's go to the next one.
No, wait, hold on. Go back to that one
Go
here.
ahead.
I just want to point something out to the people watching. So, like Gettysburg, it's a historic town, right? And so they wanted to have a historic look. And one of the things is I had a friend who used to make signs here in Gettysburg, and he was always going, head to head with the borough over sign ordinance and their whole historic district look and everything like that. Look at the signs there. If we were actually going to make this look historic in this town, we would have that mess of signs. So I don't know. I think maybe there's because look, that one sign comes out over. It needs a pole to hold it up on the other end. You see that?
Yeah. Well, they weren't as careful as they could have been.
Yeah.
Could have been. I like on the other side of if you look to the right of Joel B. Danner at 21 Baltimore Street, which is just on this side of the Blue and Gray Bar and Grill. There's a large pocket watch.
Oh yeah.
That's Penrose Myers Jewelry Store.
Yeah. Look at the size. That thing's got to be huge. From that distance, it's that big.
I always wondered with the giant pocket watch if it keeps time.
That would be awesome.
Yeah.
If it did. I doubt it.
Okay, let's go to the next one. So now we have a close-up I made from the original negative of that photograph, and you can see that that's the actual demand for supplies, and above is the demand for supplies in the letter that Kendall Hart wrote in return.
Oh, wow. Look at that.
And then I don't know if you have that one, Eric, but the next one I just compared the two.
Yeah. Look at that. That's pretty cool.
So you can see it's the same thing from that photograph.
Yeah.
So that is the actual written reply.
Huh.
Now, the next slide is the courthouse. And I put that in because I was going to tell the story. I already told it, where Juba Early comes riding up to the courthouse. And according to Clement Evans, who was the provost marshal in the town on June 26th, I guess he's the colonel of, Eric, do you remember the 38th Georgia? I'm a little lax on my Georgia brigade knowledge. Maybe it's the 26th Georgia.
What's a Georgia unit?
Boy. Okay, wait a minute. It's the 31st Georgia. But I was right. The 26th Georgia and the 38th Georgia are in that brigade, but he's the colonel of the 31st Georgia. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I do have a cheat sheet here.
Yeah.
Do you know there was a time I knew all the colonels?
Well,
you get old.
Oh, yes, I remember that. Ugh. Well, I don't remember that, but I remember you told me that.
Well, that's good enough. I didn't have to actually do it. I just needed to tell people that.
I think I know two colonels. So
let's go to the next slide. And one of the interesting things is that Juba Early gets the reply for, the town saying they can't make his requisition.
Mm-hmm.
And he's a little upset. But just at that moment, a rider comes up and says, hey, there are 3,000 rations on a train sitting at the end of the track here at the edge of town.
From
the rations for the 26th Pennsylvania Emergency Regiment that they brought with them on the trains. And so Juba Early rides down, and he's very happy.
Yes, sure. So he's gotten something, and he's going to be nice to Gettysburg? He's going to spare them totally? Or
Yeah, well, he never did say that he was going to do anything if they didn't make their reply.
Right. But that's implied, isn't it?
It's implied or else.
A bunch of armed men show up and say, give me this.
Let me remind you that 2 days later, the Confederates enter York. And while he's in York, he makes a demand for supplies. He asks for $100,000. And the town of York pays him $28,000.
Close.
And then they come back to Gettysburg, and Juba Early's division is buying things from the townspeople.
Oh, yeah, right.
And they're using that money from York, and they're buying all kinds of stuff. And so, it's kind of a joke in the years after the Civil War between Gettysburg and York that Gettysburg didn't pay and nothing happened.
Right.
And York, spent $28,000.
York kind of just like rolled over and showed its belly, though.
Yeah.
They gave it. Yeah. We had Scott Mingus on to talk about that on Patreon. And
well, Granville O'Hara made a big speech and wanted him to put up a fight.
Yeah, and they didn't. Clearly, he's not an inspiring man because it didn't work on the Yorkians.
He was bored in York. Come on, he was trying.
Yeah.
Well,
clearly he wasn't popular when he was living there.
But here's an image of the railroad. Do you got the next image up, Eric, with the railroad? So here's an image from the railroad tracks looking across the bridge that we just talked about on Route 30. Be looking across K&K Tire to Culp's Hill in the distance. We're looking down Rock Creek.
Wow. Okay, so that's the bridge. I mean, not the same one, obviously, but that's Route 30 now. And so, man, there were no trees in this area anywhere.
So they destroy the railroad bridge, not the car bridge, but the railroad bridge we're on, they destroy it.
Right.
And then they somehow push the cars down the track from the center of town that are on the track and dump them into the creek off of the destroyed bridge and create a huge mess. And they light some of the cars on fire and they do a lot of damage. Gordon's brigade spends the night in Gettysburg. Let's go to the next one.
So they do some destroying, but not of people's homes or businesses or anything like that.
So next, we have Mummersburg. And I mentioned 3 brigades marched through Mummersburg. The Louisiana Tigers spend the night somewhere near the Peace Light. But let's see if I can find my letter. I know I just saw it in here. The other 2 brigades camp around Mummersburg that night. And we do have a civilian letter that's really interesting in the Adams County Historical Society that talks about the Confederates camping around Mummersburg that night. Let's see if I can... What did I do with it?
This... So you're talking about the rest of the division that's up in Mummersburg now, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So Juba Early rides back to Mummersburg, and Juba Early spends the night in downtown Mummersburg. And we actually know, I have a letter, what house he spends the night in. Let's see. Juba Early spent the night at the postmaster's house, Samuel Hart, where they were entertained by the family. Hart was probably most accommodating, I say. His son William, who was a lad at the time, remembered that the next morning, as he was preparing to depart, the general offered his father $10 Confederate bill for the night's entertainment. Mr. Hart replied that he had no change and would prefer greenbacks, but General Early was without the latter. But there's a great account that we have a letter written on July 29th, 1863, from a guy named G.F. Minter who lives in Mummersburg. Every place you might look, you could see some rebels everywhere. Some places, everything is destroyed, but what they had on. At George Lauer's, and let's see, is George Lauer on this particular map? I think he's going to talk about John Throne here. At George Lauer's, which is north of this, they took the horses in the house and fed them out of the bureau drawers. And they took and broke up everything in the place. They encamped, he says, the first ones, meaning on June 26, encamped in John Throne's woods about a quarter of a mile from us. See John Throne's house there on the map?
Oh, yeah, okay.
So they camped in that area. And the guy down there, I think his name is Abraham Van Dyke. Okay. He's got a massive claims file for damages. And, of course, that is along the Hilltown Road.
Does he get damages? Does he get this?
Nobody's going to get damages.
Of course not.
No, of course not.
No, that's just-
But anyway, 2 Confederate brigades camped in Mummersburg on the evening of June 27th.
So Mummersburg and Gettysburg are both visited by a brigade of Early's brigades of Early's division.
Actually, let me point out, Gordon's brigade, to the best of our knowledge, camps at what would later become the site of Camp Letterman.
Oh, so they're out on Route 30.
They're at the Giant on Route 30, basically.
So they're not occupying except for the band playing in the square.
Except for a few of the men who were inside the town. Clement Evans and whatever men he keeps in the town. The whole brigade, it's like 2,000 men camp outside the town.
Okay, well that was nice.
So let's go to the next map. It's my troop movements the next day. So they stay the night here, and the next day, you see they move across to Adams County in 3 columns. And that's one of the reasons I said I think Juba Early would have divided his force anyway.
Right.
He wants to move across Adams and York County by parallel routes to get to the Susquehanna River. And you can see that on this map, I have the Louisiana Tigers march up to Mummersburg, back to Mummersburg, and then they march out across Goldenville Road to Hunterstown, and then march up what is now 394 through New Chester and out through Hampton and East Berlin and into York County. At the very bottom of the map, Colonel Elijah White would leave Gettysburg, ride out the Hanover Road, and eventually go to Hanover, and then ride to Hanover Junction. And the center column, John B. Gordon's brigade, would actually march out of Gettysburg, and I have some little things here. They destroyed the railroad bridge, mostly the night before. Then they rode out, and they destroyed Golden Station, which is a warehouse along the railroad. They burned it to the ground. They tried to get into it and get the supplies out of it, and the people claimed they didn't have the keys, so they couldn't open it up. So the guy with the key left, so you can't get in. So they just burned it.
Makes sense.
And then they marched to New Oxford, and they destroyed the railroad bridge across Conewaga Creek about a mile northwest of New Oxford. And if you ever want to do something fascinating, go to New Oxford train station and walk the tracks northeast out to that bridge. It's like 50 feet in the air above the creek, and it's a massive bridge they destroyed.
Really?
And Herman helped would rebuild the bridges that the Confederates destroyed after the battle. And so Gordon's brigade marches through New Oxford and then Abbottstown and into York County, where that night he reaches Farmers, and that's when the representatives from York come out and surrender the city to him.
I encourage you guys to become patrons, because we talk about this with Scott Mingus. He wrote a book about it, and shame on York. Shame on York. That's all I have to say.
And then, of course, and then I have another map. The next map is on June 27th and 28th, the Confederate Army captures York, Pennsylvania, and Gordon's brigade goes all the way to the Susquehanna River at Wrightsville. And at the same time, Rhodes' division captures Carlisle, and part of Albert Jenkins' brigade skirmishes on the outskirts of Harrisburg. And the last slide I think I have on here is the burning of the Wrightsville-Columbia Bridge on June 28th. And so this June 26th action that we talk about is part of a larger campaign where the Confederate Army moves across York and Adams County and advances to the Susquehanna River. And of course we know, while the Wrightsville-Columbia Bridge is in flames, a spy has arrived at Lee's headquarters and is telling him that the Union Army is now at Frederick, Maryland. And Lee is going to order for the concentration of the Southern Army back at Gettysburg. So
all progress is halted, and they all head on back.
And they're all going to have to turn and head back.
The Battle of Gettysburg begins.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now,
so go ahead.
I was going to say there's probably a few questions that we
Well, yeah.
didn't
So
answer that we
here's what I'm going to do, Tim, because we are on hour 4 of the show. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you the question. We're going to do it like a lightning round, okay? All right. So here we go. Quickest answers that we can come up with here. Rick Fish from San Antonio wants to know, were there any Gettysburg Confederate collaborators during the June 26th visit, beside, of course, Jenny Wade? Were any freed black Gettysburg residents seized and sent south to slavery on June 26th? Go.
Well, I would say no to the first one, but at the head of Jeb Store's column is a guy named Jim Furley, who had formerly lived in Gettysburg but had moved to Virginia. And he was a Confederate scout that led the column. And there's a great account where on June 26th, he leaves the column and then finds his former employee, I believe Adam Dorsum, a blacksmith, and beats him up.
Oh, it's not nice.
Yeah. And to the second one, you know, at the very outbreak of the campaign, Albert Jenkins' guys are gathering up African Americans and marching them back down in the South in captivity. And a lot of the people in this area have learned of that, and a large amount of the black population has fled. And I don't know if anybody taken on June 26 per se, but, you know, during around the time of the battle, the Southerners are actively scouring the area and trying to capture any black citizens they can find.
Well, Tilly Pierce talks about, I don't know if it's on the 26th, but she talks about them fleeing to Culp's Hill. Also, so who was it that...
Sally Myers talks about them fleeing.
Yeah, but also somebody's mother hides them above the kitchen.
Yeah, that's Mary Warren Fashionat.
That's right.
Hides the family.
And then who's the boy that witnesses...
Albertus McCreary says he sees black citizens being taken prisoner during the actual battle.
And he quotes one of the guys saying, "Goodbye, we're going back into slavery."
Yeah.
But so there were smaller, but it wasn't as widespread as west of here because we had some warning here.
Yeah, they had some warning.
Yeah.
So west of here it was really bad.
Yeah.
In Chambersburg on June 15th and June 16th and June 17th, that's when the real gathering is taking place, where they're just gathering up dozens, if not hundreds, of black residents.
There's an account from a woman out in Chambersburg. I can't remember her name now, but she talks about how they are chasing them down and rounding them up like cattle, like we would drive cattle. She says it's really sad. Okay. Bill Richardson wants to know, I read somewhere that Gordon had sent word back to Ewell of a shoe factory in Gettysburg. Any truth to that?
Well, that's an interesting story. So, and that story's been around for a while. As far as I know, that is an old guide story, meaning it was probably started. There's no real good source to where it started, but the tour guide started telling the story early on. Wilbur Nye, the Civil War guy, in his book, Here Come the Rebels, he writes that in his book. He says that when Juba Early was in town, he was kind of busy. He noticed there was a shoe factory, and he didn't have time to go over to the shoe factory and check it out. But he had time to send a message back to A.P. Hill and say, hey, if you come through the town later, you should probably check out this shoe factory.
Yeah.
So a couple things ridiculous about it. He's got time to write a message to tell this guy, but he doesn't have time to send an aide over to see if they actually have shoes at the shoe factory.
Good point.
And then the second thing is, what's Juba Early doing with AP? His Corps commander's Ewell. I'll bet you every message goes to Ewell and then goes to Lee, and then he's not going to be sending a message to AP Hill or Heath.
Right.
That's ridiculous.
And he would know that Hill is behind him, right?
So I want everybody to get out their copy of Wilbur Nye, the Civil War guy.
Sure.
Here Come the Rebels. And I want you to find this passage we're talking about in the book. And there's a footnote. And I remember that in the guide room, I do this a lot. When somebody asks about it, I pull it out and I'm like, look, here's a footnote. And I'll read what he says in the note about him sending a message back. And there's a footnote. And we turn to the footnote. And the footnote says something like, on June 30th, Henry Heath came to Gettysburg to check out this shoe factory, but ran into Buford's cavalry and turned around. And then the next day, which he says in the book is June 31st, comes into town to, and I'm like, what? June 31st?
June 31st?
Well, anyway, it's
well, back then they had a 31st day.
In other words, the footnote that he has associated with this, there is no footnote.
Okay.
It's an annotation.
I gotcha.
And that's you wouldn't believe how many times I catch authors doing this, saying something dramatic and then having a footnote. And most casual readers like, oh, wow, must be documented. No, you look and see what the footnote is.
Yeah. It's always interesting to read the footnotes. Like we were talking about the other day with the Lieutenant Colonel Crest thing. The footnotes gave me no help at all. Okay. Skip Wankman asks, did Governor Curtin or any authority really think that the 26th PEV or other militia unit would make a true difference against Lee's veterans? We touched on this before, but I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah. Well, I feel bad, picking on them or criticizing them because I understand exactly the situation they're placed in.
It's a tough situation.
And to just expect that these troops are going to be able to stop Lee's veterans. Let me put it this way. At no point at any time during the Gettysburg campaign did any militiamen stop Confederate advances.
Right.
And as a matter of fact, not only did they not even come close to stopping any Confederate advances, they ran every single time quickly.
Right.
So it really is no contest at all.
They didn't even slow them because they sped them up. Yeah.
So
Brian Derenick says, is there any record of an attempt by Gettysburg town leaders to contact military officials in the Army of the Potomac to alert them that a portion of Lee's army had moved through town on June 26th?
Well, like we talked about, the townspeople, David McConaughey, David Wills, are both at the telegraph office sending messages to Governor Curtin. And then they expect Governor Curtin will relay that information with a vast amount of other useless information to the Union High Command. But then, they don't know the Army of the Potomac is in close proximity until it reaches Emmitsburg on June 29th.
Yeah.
But on June 28th, Copeland's force rides into Gettysburg, and David McConaughey talks to Copeland. And at that point, the Union Army's in Frederick, and that, and it's still under the command of Hooker. But then, he'll end up relaying that information to Meade as the Union Army advances.
And he has another question. Big stars on the 26th is White's Comanches, or are White's Comanches. But what role do they play in the rest of the battle?
Well, they're at the head of June 26th when they come into town. Then June 27th, they ride into Hanover. They ride through the center Hanover. They go over to Hanover Junction. They cut the telegraph wires at Hanover Junction. And maybe Scott Menges talked about that. And we even have a great account, from one of, I don't remember the exact time, but to give the exact time, like at 12:07 p.m., the telegraph line was cut somewhere between Glen Rock and York. And then they ride to Spring Grove, and which I think they call Spring Forge maybe at that time.
Okay.
But they end up spending the night at Spring Grove, and then they come back across Route 30, and then they end up riding to Heidlersburg, and then moving into Gettysburg with Juba Early's force. It's interesting that when the Southern Army portions of it, and I guess White's guys would be part of that, come through Abbottstown on their way back, they hear firing in the distance about 6 miles away to the south at Hanover, and you're wondering, aren't you looking for Jeb Stuart? Can't you figure out that that's Jeb Stuart there? They're not paying much attention.
No. Okay, go ahead.
And so they go back through to Hunter, up by way of Newchester. I think they come into Heidlersburg. And then the next morning on July 1st, Albert Jenkins' guys are with Juba Early's guys when they come into town. And Albert Jenkins is wounded in the Battle of Gettysburg by a long-range artillery shell and ends up is Albert Jenkins? Yeah. Ends up I think it's on early morning hours of July 2nd, he's wounded, ends up on the Harrisburg Road in a hospital. And he's killed in 1864. One interesting story, on the evening of July 1st, Albert Jenkins is at the meeting with Robert E. Lee and Robert Rhodes and General Ewell and Juba Early when they're at the Spangler House and they're discussing the situation as to whether the Confederates should attack Culp's Hill on July 2nd. So we have him there at that meeting too.
Okay. So he's doing something.
He's pretty active.
Yeah. He had his beard was really long and he tucked it into his pants. Is that right? Is that who I'm thinking of?
I don't know.
Oh, okay.
He's got a long beard.
Yeah. All right. Well, Tim, thank you very much for this. Eric, you did a great job with the slides and everything, and I think the audience will give you a round of applause. I'll do it on their behalf. But yeah, thank you for doing that. Thank you, Tim, for coming and putting all this stuff together. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching, and thank you all for listening. Lots of thanks to go around, but we hope you enjoyed this, and we will talk to you next time. Don't forget, in order to send those questions in, you got to become a patron. You got to become a patron. And we just got a patron in the middle of the show here, so welcome, Ben Roca. I think it's Roca.
How do you know that? Is it like
I get a notification. It's Rocca, R-O-C-C-A, or Roca, I don't know. But Benjamin, welcome. Thank you. Okay, that's it. Good night. Thank you, Tim. Are you a reenactor or living historian? Or maybe you're a War of Rights player and want to bring esprit de corps to your team. Well, then you need the Badge Maker, the leading provider of Civil War and other historical badges and insignias. Mention this ad with an attached message in your order and receive a free surprise gift. I myself bought a metal 2nd Corps badge, and it always starts a conversation when I wear it. So hit up the Badge Maker at civilwarcorpsbadges.com. Something for everyone and anyone.
Our hearts so stout have got us famed, for soon 'tis known from whence we came. Wherever we go, they dread the name of Gary Owen in glory. Instead of spa, drink down ale and pay the reckoning on the nail. No man for debt shall go to jail from Gary Owen in glory. Instead of spa, drink down